Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Regional Development Assessment Panel. I declare the meeting open at 1:02 p.m. and acknowledge we are hosting this meeting on the traditional land of the Whadjuk people among our nation. We acknowledge the Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of Western Australia, pay respect to elders past and present, and the ongoing connection between people, land, waters and community. This meeting will be run in accordance with the DAP Standing Orders 2024 under the DAP Regulations 2011. The meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the DAP website in accordance with Regulation 42A of the DAP Regulations. Panel members may refer to technical devices throughout the meeting to assist in considering information for them. Take the opportunity to introduce all the DAP members that will be participating today. My name is Dale Page. I'm the presiding member today. With me in the room, I have the Deputy Presiding Member to the left, Karen Hyde, and Eugene Holtaz, Specialist Member. For Part B, Town of Port Hedland, we are meant to be joined by Mayor Peter Carter. I believe he's running a little late, and Councillor Camilo Blanco. We don't have Councillor Blanco yet, but he is able to join us as soon as he's available. For Part C, City of Busselton, we have Councillor Anne Ryan and Councillor Kate Cox. Apologies, we have none today. Members on leave of absence, there are nil. Noting of minutes of all previous meetings are available on the DAP website. We will now move to Part B, the Town of Port Hedland, and item 1 under Part B is declaration of due consideration. Panel members need to have considered all the documentation contained within Part B of the agenda and the Part B related information. Could I please confirm by a show of hands that members have considered all the information? Thank you. Item 2, disclosures of interest. No disclosures of interest have been received to this point. Do any members wish to make any declarations of interest in relation to this item? No? All right, could I just check with the Town of Port Hedland staff, has this matter been before your councillors at a briefing or a council meeting?
The practice of the Town of Port Hedland is to notify elected members that we have received a DAP application at the time that public consultation occurs. The application and an opportunity for comment was provided in that time, and the application was not referred to a formal committee or council meeting.
Thank you for that. Great. Moving on then to item 3, Form 1 DAP applications. Item 3.1, Lot 51 Kennedy Street, South Hedland. Proposed workforce accommodation and group dwellings, DAP number 25/02899. We have a number of presenters on this item today. We have Julian Wilmot-Barr from Grounded Construction Group, speaking for the recommendation in the report. Scott Allen, also Grounded Construction Group, speaking for the recommendation in the report. Shane McSweeney from Pentium, speaking for the recommendation in the report. Claire Smith from Flight, speaking for the recommendation, and Claire Willie from Element, speaking for the recommendation. Given you are all part of the same team, I'm going to allow you your 3 minutes each, and we will hold all our questions till the end of that time, if that works for you. I do need to remind you that in accordance with our standing orders, your presentations have been limited to 3 minutes. We have a very big meeting today, so I'm going to call you to time as soon as you hit your 3 minutes. And I encourage you to focus on the stuff you want to get across in that time frame. The panel members will be able to ask you questions after your presentation. Starting with Julian.
Good afternoon.
Time starts when you're ready.
Good afternoon, thank you for your time. Julian Wilmot-Barr, Chief Financial Officer for the Grounded Group of Companies, of which we are the freehold landowners and the potential developers of the proposed project at Lot 51 Kennedy Street, South Hedland. We understand the demand profile for the temporary workers accommodation in Port Hedland. We specify as core business, building temporary workers accommodations for particularly regional Pilbara operators, Tier 1 miners in particular. We have the acute constraint of housing our own workers in the Pilbara region. We come up against it on an operational basis, and this project is designed to alleviate that long-term constraint. We understand the constraints on residential building costs in South Hedland in particular, in the builder. We would like to focus on a model that allows us to bring this site, which we're aligned in terms of its long-term residential use profile and sensitive to the residential setting, a model that will allow us to bring residential accommodation online at the same time as producing positive cash flow to a long-term subdivision whilst operating a temporary workers facility for the designated period in between. Our proposed model is two-tiered. We would commit and provide 15 townhouses in the group dwelling setting initially, working towards the residential long-term nature of the project, as well as the rooms for temporary workers on a TWA basis. We understand the demand profile and the unique nature of the Port Hedland economics in terms of the worker profile. We are a unique micro-economy in Port Hedland where work is temporary. Us ourselves operating core business in the region, very familiar with this constraint. However, there's a phenomenon where a lot of the temporary workers accommodation designated is preoccupied by large tier 1 miners, leaving quite a constraint on a gap in terms of large operators and contractors trying to service the mining contracts. That's our key focus and our key demand profile is building into that gap with a temporary facility that would house up to 254 workers, which represents almost less than 10% of the total available temporary workers accommodation in Port Hedland at the moment. Our focus is quality. We're absolutely focused on the design features of this project. We don't want to provide a traditional camp or a traditional cost-effective donga solution. We're very much focused in elevating the standard of living away from home for temporary workers. It's our mission as a company. We have rolled in a number of empirical evidenced design features in relation to the design layout and the facilities and amenities, the rooms in particular, focusing on employee wellbeing, social welfare in this particularly sensitive environment now for workers working away from home.
We're at your 3 minutes. I'll ask you to wrap up, please.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Scott Allen, over to you. Your time starts when you're ready.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Allen. I'm the project manager for this development. I've been leading the design coordination, and we've really taken the approach to rethink our approach to this type of development. And we've offered both short-term worker accommodation, but also long-term residential townhousing offering. And that's showing our commitment to the site to transition to residential in the future. We also have not maximised the density of the site with accommodation. We've really spread out the units to give that visual amenity, that low density, and really activate the landscape-led design of this development. The site was formerly the BHP Pundle-Murra campsite. It's been unused, it's been vacant land for over a decade, and our project revitalises the area with a real thoughtful layout and strong physical connections, especially those to the iconic South Hedland Water Tower. And that feedback was initially given to us by the town of Port Hedland to really activate that tower in our design, which we did. As I mentioned earlier, the design is really landscape-led. We plant over 39,000 plants, and we have provided designated breakout areas for socialising, including barbecue zones, kickabouts, and extensive garden areas. We've been cognizant of the site and where it's located, and we've activated Stanley Street with a traditional residential 2-storey townhouse design with front courtyards, rear parking, and permeable fencing. On Kennedy Street, we've enhanced the vegetation, we look to activate the verges, and our design enables community interface and engagement with our facility. We also wanted to mitigate the impact of our development, and what we did is we plan to use the existing infrastructure that was there before with the Pundle-Murra camp. So we proposed the existing car park and existing crossover. We've also selected materials appropriate for the climate and to withstand the cyclonic conditions. We've been engaging with the Water Corps and have been able to design our landscaping to fit within the requirements available to us for the site. We aim to use recycled materials and have designed solar technology which will continue the sustainable operation of the project. As Jules mentioned, we've really aiming to provide worker accommodation that's different from what's currently provided. We'll provide a sea container pool, a sports multi-court, a shaded outdoor gym, indoor gym. We've even provided a running track around the development to really activate that physical and mental wellbeing. As I mentioned earlier, our dining hall, cafe, bar and convenience store are Kennedy Street facing, which enables easy access by the community. And this aligns with our social impact mandate.
We're at your time, so I'll ask you to wrap up.
Thank you. We undertook extensive community and stakeholder engagement, which started late last year, and we feel we've adopted those recommendations and those of the design review panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jane McSweeney, your 3 minutes starts when you're ready.
I'll try not to do the 3 minutes. Drainage is boring for everybody, I'm sure. Look, I think temporary workforce accommodation, Scott's talked about it a lot. It was actually relatively easy from a stormwater perspective because they committed to having so much green and open space, and I didn't have to fight with the architects to figure out where we're going to actually hold water. So in terms of what we've done, traditionally we would just get a condition of subdivision, and this one we voluntarily put forward a preliminary water management plan, which allowed us really to demonstrate how the project and the concept would work. And obviously rainfall intensity up there is pretty strong, and really that's a big consideration for most local governments, particularly the town of Port Hedland. So we wanted to demonstrate right at the start that this project worked. So that's what we've done. We've submitted a preliminary UWMP, and we welcome, I suppose, and accept, as we would have understood would happen, a condition of a UWMP. Look, in terms of the drainage design, because of those big landscaped areas, it's allowed us to allow the rainfall runoff on the new impervious and the roof areas to run into kind of drainage swales that will be vegetated through the development, and they all, I suppose, grade towards a drainage basin where we will retain the rainfall as much as possible, and then any overflow above that, which is less than what would have happened pre-development, that will sheet flow onto Kennedy Street and across the way by the TAFE. There's the regional drainage network that will take that away out to South Creek, I think. So in terms of what we've done, we've responded to the landscape, we've responded to the climatic conditions, and we've designed, an engineering and an architectural solution that manages that rainfall, and that drainage design looks to manage what would happen in its current condition. And I won't go into all the technical stuff. That's it.
Great. Thank you for that. Claire Smith.
Okay, hello everyone. I would just like to be short here and to say that obviously with the number of workers that are being accommodated, we looked at the worst case scenario and assumed every single worker leaves in 1 hour, comes back in 1 hour. It's the intersection, a particular note that the town of Port Hedland pointed out to us. We surveyed 10 hours for that intersection, started at 5 a.m, going from 5 a.m to 10 a.m, and then from 2 p.m to 7 p.m, so we knew exactly what the traffic volumes were. We know the work sites that the workers are going to go to, so we're able to distribute traffic, and we put all the traffic through in 1 hour, and SIDRA analysis showed that it was still within acceptable limits. There's still, so level service B and level service C, that's quite technical, but there's the intersections have capacity. So even if every single worker were to leave in 1 hour. So that's all I really say.
Excellent. Great. Right. Well, it's the Claire show today. Where is it? Is it Wiley or Willie? Sorry. Over to you.
Thank you, Presiding Member and Regional DAP members, for the opportunity to present today. I will wrap up our deputations now, and I'm speaking in regard to orderly and proper planning and the proposed amendments to the conditions. So as the project team here have explained, this is an innovative accommodation solution that will support both the need for diversified accommodation for workers and also provides a pathway to permanent residential development that's in line with the local planning strategy. It's a low density development where the land uses and the density are consistent with the surrounding residential neighbourhood. Our development application properly addresses the relevant strategic and statutory requirements and won't jeopardise the future development of the site. And this is because our development already includes some of those permanent residential components that are envisaged for the site under the local planning framework. The combined workforce accommodation and group dwelling land uses means that the townhouses can be occupied as both short-term accommodation and also permanent places of residence. We're seeking a 10-year time-limited approval for the workforce accommodation. And the master plan that was included with the DA submission shows how the site can transition to its ultimate residential permanent residential purpose through a mix of likely green title and survey strata subdivision. The density that we are proposing for townhouses is at R40, and the surrounding residential neighbourhood has densities that range between R20 and R50. Shane has already outlined how the urban water management plan will deal with stormwater capture in line with the policy, LPP 11, with the basin and the swale network. The TAA, as Claire mentioned before, shows that the local road network can manage peak traffic movements, and we have proposed, and the town has recommended, an operational management plan condition that can also help further manage community traffic. We have a social impact assessment in line with LPP 6, which will scaffold the social benefits to the local community. The DRP, as Scott mentioned, gave its broad support for the proposal, and the design was further refined to address the comments that arose through the DRP. We are seeking some variations to the high design standards under Table 2 of LPP 6, but these are limited and they're relatively minor, and on balance, given the proposed design and landscape approach, will result in a high quality outcome. We support the town's recommendation, and we thank the officers for their collaboration during the assessment process, but we do have some concerns with the conditions that were recommended by the town, and we're respectfully requesting that the DAP panel today approves the development with amended conditions. Some of these, like condition 3 and 4, are relatively minor.
We are at time, so I'll ask you to wrap up. I'll give you a little bit longer, but if you can wrap up, that'll be great. We have read the...
Yes. Yeah, thank you. I will just touch on a couple of the conditions that we've requested to be deleted. In particular, 14 and 15, these don't appear to be valid conditions in their current format. There's a real lack of framework, I think, at the moment to support these in terms of need and nexus and overall governance. We can't see how the condition would be managed, what the detailed purpose, what the timeframe for spending, how the amount was arrived at. And also in regard to the link, the footpath link under condition 15, this is not actually town of Port Hedland managed land. This is state government land that has Watercorp assets in it, and Watercorp had advised us early in the process that they don't have a time frame for when they will be improving these assets that sit in the state-owned land. In regard to the cost, the covering, this is condition 11 is for car park cover. If we were to do that, we'd have to do it to cyclone standards, which is very cost prohibitive, and we think there's a better landscape that will promote urban cooling as well and reduce the heat sink risk. So we could put in fast growing trees and or large pot sizes. Thank you.
I will need to bring you to a close if that's okay.
Thank you.
Good, great. Okay. Right, Councillor Blanco, I believe we have you with us. You have joined us. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, thanks. Sorry I'm late.
That's okay, Councillor. We'll need to go back to item 1, the declaration of due consideration. You would have need to have considered all the documentation in relation to this item, including the related information that was uploaded to the website. Are you able to confirm that you have considered all the information?
I have, yes.
Thank you very much. Okay. We will now move to questions of these presenters. Councillor Blanco, you would not have been present for their presentations, but you should have received and read their written submissions requesting a deputation. Do you have any questions of these presenters?
Not at this stage, no.
Okay, great. Other panel members' questions?
Thank you, Presiding Member. Karen Hyde speaking. To Claire Willie, first of all, I'll just give you the opportunity to continue where you started there, talking about the conditions that you feel fundamentally you want us to consider reviewing. And I think you had spoken about conditions 14, 15 and 11. Are there any others out of the by me saying, quite a long list that you provided commentary on that you really feel are very important to the future of this development.
Sorry, yes, thank you, Deputy Presiding Member, for the opportunity. Condition 13 also requires a subdivision application to be lodged. This we feel is premature because at first we would go to act upon a subdivision, and we're asking for a workforce accommodation land use to be approved for 10 years. We recognise that this is an important part for developing the site, and that this would be properly addressed closer to the end of the period of workforce accommodation. Respecting the concerns of the officers, which was the genesis, I think, of the original condition, we did propose amendments to condition 3 that would essentially set the expectation around future land use to transition to permanent residential at the end of the workforce accommodation approval period. And that suggestion was made so that everybody is on notice as to what is the expectation for this land use in the future. I did say before that the condition 3 and condition 4 asks for a decommissioning plan to be prepared closer to the end of the workforce accommodation life, and we think that's better because it gives us more time to integrate the technologies that may not be available today but may be available in 8 years' time, let's say, to be able to decommission the site. We're happy to provide principles around decommissioning today to help guide that and to give the town some certainty over how we would decommission the site, and that would be acceptable to the applicant. Condition 7 and 12 we just asked to be deleted because we've submitted a SIA with management provisions at 6.1 of that report, and the TIA was resubmitted and can be endorsed today, so they're just unnecessary conditions at this time. I think that wraps up all the condition requests.
Okay, and then you've got some commentary about advice notes, etc.
Oh, sorry, yes.
That's fine.
Yes, we just felt that those were perhaps better.
I did have a question in your wording, and it may not be one of your essentials, but condition 17, your commentary on that seemed to sort of fall away without completing the sentence. And I just wondered if I was missing the sense of it.
Yes, no, I think consider was just an error, sorry.
Oh, okay, all right. I've got a couple of other questions if I may. This would be to the first speaker. What's the intention for managing the townhouses? Who would ultimately, or who would be the manager? Would that be your company, or would you outsource that?
At this stage, we've got a number of different models we could enact. We have the intention to go for subdivision, the group dwellings, and turn them into individually strated or metered, in which case we have the ability to then on-sell to more permanent residents. But in the initial stages of the operating management plan, we would run a individual management company underneath the developer that would essentially facilitate the management of the townhouses themselves, incorporating the use of the central facilities of the village for food, messing, accommodation, services available to those residents.
Okay. And just one other question, and this is about the urban water management plan. The plan that you've proposed, does that sort of work towards safeguarding the future should the remainder of the site become developed for residential accommodation as opposed to workforce? Is the layout that you have proposed for the UWMP going to be consistent with that, or would there need to be some revision of that?
I think there'll naturally be some revision of it, but I think the principles and the general spine of it will
configuration
will be the same. Yeah. It's nuance with when you have a
Sure.
a permanent resident might be slightly larger with change things, but I think the principles in the key arterial network will be the same. Yeah. And the principles of discharge to the town of Port Hedland's infrastructure in a large stormwater.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's all from me.
Yeah, I've got a few queries. The design review panel mentioned that the car park for the dwelling units, a group dwelling, could be shifted and abut the residential units themselves. Was there any thought given to that? I couldn't see anything in there why that wasn't done.
This is the townhouses.
Yeah,
So we've got 2 bays per each townhouse, so 30 car bays. And the way we've managed that, we didn't want to impact additional traffic on Stanley Street or put in new crossovers. So to access those townhouses, the people with the keys to those townhouses will go around the ring road, around the development. They're the only ones that will have access to use those car bays for the townhouses.
fine. Question was, the design review panel said, why don't you flip the bays from abutting the workers' accommodation and put it up against townhouses themselves?
From my memory, they wanted us to get access off Stanley Street for those townhouses, for those car bays.
Okay, maybe I misread it.
Trying to promote that as a activated pedestrian space and to avoid the conflict between vehicles and pedestrians using the footpath so that you could actually walk around the site.
Yeah. Okay. With the servicing of the group dwelling site, where are the connections for sewer and water and stormwater, given that your transition to a conventional, has that been thought of?
It has. In our fourth services report, we've shown that the sewer will be gravity connecting to Stanley Street, whereas the worker accommodation will connect back to Kennedy Street. And we'll also get our water services, our potable water services from Stanley Street as well. At the moment, we've got our stormwater drainage coming back through the site to Kennedy Street, but we've thought in front of, yes, if we want to lodge a service charter application, these will be separately metered on power, water and sewer.
Stormwater?
Same location. You obviously won't change gravity too
But
much.
if you do the development as proposed and you subdivide off the group dwellings, townhouses, their stormwater will go where? Because you'll have a separate lot.
We've shown connection to the lot to the south, which is lot 2940 Horizon Power. So if you look at our proposed future residential plan,
Yeah, there's
manage the drainage.
in the interim, what would happen? Is it, you're not proposing to green title or strata title the group dwellings yet?
Under this application.
Okay. All right, that's all I had to query.
I have a few questions, if you don't mind. So, and you might have covered this off, Claire, but I missed it. You've asked us to amend condition 4 to require the decommissioning and site rehabilitation plan at least 12 months prior to expiry of the approval, rather than within 12 months of the issue of the approval. The reason you've given is the amended timeframe is more appropriate. Could you be a little bit more specific as to why?
I think it's because it's 10 years away potentially that we would be decommissioning, and putting forward a decommissioning plan today means that we don't have that opportunity to integrate future technology into a decommissioning plan. And that's really the reason that we can provide the principles today to provide the town some comfort, and if there should be officer changeover in that period of time, there's something on record that speaks to what the expectation is based on today's technology, but it allows for that to be revised in accordance with what could come in another 8 years' time or 9 years' time.
Thank you for that. Why don't you feel that you're responsible for irrigating and maintaining the landscape on your verge?
We can live with that. On Kennedy Street, yeah, we can live with that.
Okay. And then condition 11, which deals with the carport structures. So I hear the justification that you put forward, but why would you not look at carport structures for the group dwellings given their residential uses?
It's a cost prohibitive exercise given they're cyclonic. So we're mindful that the cost to construct up there is extremely high, up to 50 to 80% higher than Perth. And we're really trying to be cost effective in how we design it. And that was one of the things that we didn't put in at this time. We're hoping that fast growing shaded trees can serve the same purpose.
Those would also be on the west side of the townhouses. So they will be traded in effect anyway through the afternoon.
And then you've asked us to delete condition 12 requiring the updated TIA and endorse the amended version submitted on the 4th of July. The TIA that accompanies this responsible authority report's got a stamp on it saying it was amended on the 1st of July. Are we talking about the same version here?
Well, if I can answer this. There was a query from the town of Port Hedland on the 4th of July, which I responded to. So I think that they're just asking for that response to be incorporated into the TIA.
And the request on the 4th of July was actually answered in the 1st of July version. It was the tables that were responded to are actually in the appendix.
Well, they were, but then they said, what if all the traffic goes in a single hour? So what I talked to you through today about all it going in a single hour, that was a question that was posed on the 4th of July.
Okay, and you've responded to them, but...
I responded via email, so I think that they're just asking for that analysis to be officially in the report. Instead of my email, I gave dot points and I gave Sidra tables. I think they just want that official response in.
Okay, so
I can put it in an appendix.
could you live with just updating the TIA with that little bit so we leave condition 12 intact because that's all that is required? Okay, that's great. Unless there are any further questions of these presenters, we might move to questions of the local government officers. We have Casimir Pinheiro and Chaz Roberts with us today from the town of Port Hedland. Councillor Blanco, do you have any questions of the officers?
No, I don't, not at this stage.
Okay, great. Other members, questions of the officers?
Thank you, presiding member. Karen Hyde speaking. The applicant has questioned conditions 14 and 15 and their validity, given that they reference contributions. And certainly for one of them, I think I noticed that your public open space strategy, which talks to the footpath, is, I think, yet to be advertised. Could you comment on the head of power for those two conditions, please, 14 and 15?
Okay, so condition 14 refers to a social contribution. So the town of Port Hedland local planning scheme number 7 includes a supplemental provision to the deemed provisions, which refers to considering any social impact statement or management plan relevant to a development. The town of Port Hedland has a local planning policy and social impact assessment, which refers to leveraging developer contributions for social infrastructure in accordance with the principles of SPP 3.6, noting that the way in which SPP 3.6 was formulated is typically geared towards linear growth scenarios, which are not prevalent in Port Hedland and the Pilbara region. It's typically dependent on market activity, which makes it very difficult to undertake infrastructure planning and forecast the projects which you would leverage the contributions from. So, and that policy framework has been in place for over 7 years, and it's been consistently applied by the town to workforce accommodation proposals. In terms of the figure within the condition, what we've done is we've looked at other workforce accommodation facilities that have received approval, and we have who have also provided a financial contribution for social infrastructure, and we have worked out the average cost per bed per year, and then we've multiplied that by the number of beds in this proposal and the number of years for which approval is sought, and that number has come out as 550,000. We're proposing for it to be utilised for social infrastructure within 1 kilometre of the site, which we see as a walkable catchment. There's a number of public open spaces and town master plan projects within that catchment, which we believe users of the facility would utilise and access for their own recreational benefits. In terms of that condition, it does refer in the body of the report to the public open space and street tree strategy, which may be utilised for that expenditure. So that is a document which is being presented to our council next Wednesday night for adoption. It has been prepared over the course of the last 18 months with significant community and stakeholder engagement to formulate the document, and that would form part of an updated local planning strategy in the future. Moving to condition 15, that refers to the construction of a publicly accessible footpath. So the footpath in question is identified in the Town of Port Hedland active transport strategy as a missing link. There is a number of missing footpath links within the South Hedland locality. It's shown as a 2-metre wide path, and the condition doesn't specify the land to which the footpath is constructed. We note that Water Corporation are not supportive of local government infrastructure constructed on their reserve, and we have confirmed that with Water Corporation ourselves. But that's not to say that this proposal could locate the footpath within their property boundaries, and for that to be either managed by the local government through a maintenance agreement, or potentially, given this is an urban development zone, there is no structure plan. There could be a portion of the northern end of the site that is seeded as a pedestrian access way to the local government, which would not be an uncommon requirement for a structure plan area of this nature for residential development.
So do I take it that the town therefore has a community infrastructure fund established and has a Forward Works community infrastructure programme as required?
Yeah, so the town has a Forward Capital Works program, which forms part of the integrated planning and reporting framework for local government, and it informs our long-term financial plan. So there are a number of infrastructure projects outlined in that plan. What we would seek through this condition is to develop an agreement with the proponent as to any specific work within the plan that they are agreeable for the funding to be spent towards, and to ensure that it meets that need and nexus principle.
So another condition that you proposed was an update of the social impact assessment, and the applicant has suggested that they would like that condition to be deleted. That's condition 7, because they feel that that is capable of endorsing. What was the justification from the town's point of view for condition 7? Is it that you are actually, from that social impact assessment, looking for something along the lines of some management plan, or something which then perhaps is even an alternate to the conditions 14 and 15 that you've suggested? Because the impact assessment actually has got quite a lot of potential in it for contributing to the community.
Yeah, so the rationale behind condition 7 is primarily related to providing a head of power to require ongoing monitoring of the effectiveness of the social impact management plan. Obviously, the approvals for a 10-year period, lots can change within 10 years. The Town of Port Hedland has a practice where at the beginning of every financial year, we evaluate the effectiveness of all of the SIMPs from all the workforce accommodation facilities, and we identify areas for improvement. And then we write to each of the operators and request that they consider making those improvements on a year-on-year basis. So condition 7, in particular, the ongoing monitoring component, provides that head of power linked to the development approval to enable us to do this.
Right, so am I understanding then that you're comfortable with the SIA? The SIMP at the moment talks about things to be considered and the potential for things. And so condition 7 is there in order to perhaps provide some more finality or certainty around the SIMP?
Yes, the SIA and SIMP provide some potential options, but no real tangible commitments. So it also helps with addressing that.
Okay, thank you. The applicant did their own R code assessment against R40. Did the town review that, and are you comfortable with that assessment?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I have any more, thank you.
Okay, I've got a few. Who is generally or usually responsible for maintenance of landscaping on verges?
It really depends on site to site. As developments are proposed in town, where there is a link to from the site to the verge, we'll often apply a condition relating to development and maintenance of the verge adjacent to the development site. So it does vary across the town site.
Okay. Just on the issue of covering of the car bays, can you explain why you asked for that to happen? And secondly, given you're so desperate for accommodation up there and it's expensive to build, why would you be asking for that requirement?
Table 7 of local planning scheme number 7, which talks about additional site and development requirements under row 1, car parking, subclause 9. It refers to when considering any application for development approval, the local government shall have regard to and may impose conditions concerning subsection A, the proportion of car parking bays to be roofed or covered and the design criteria for this covering. So the town has identified that it's suitable in this instance to establish covered parking given the nature of the development, but we also note that the residential design codes don't require covered car parking. It's really a climatic consideration, and it would add to the livability of the dwelling component of the development.
So just on that, is it reasonable to request covering the 49 car bays on Kennedy Street when those will be serving a temporary use?
Sorry, the dwelling component from what?
49 car bays. I'm not talking about the group dwellings. I'm talking about the other 49 car bays that you seek to have covered. Is that reasonable given that's for a temporary use?
I guess in terms of the workforce accommodation bays, if alternative shading was provided, such as 1 tree per 4 bays, that would be considered a suitable alternative.
Okay. Condition 9 relates to fencing. Are you actually seeking a plan showing the fencing ahead of or as part of the building permit application, or were you just setting out your expectations generally with this condition?
So did you catch that?
No.
Okay, so yeah, the fencing is, we're just seeking to confirm that the fencing meets SEPTED principles, and for that detail to be provided, yeah, prior to building permit.
Right. Okay. Condition 13, that's about subdivision approval. Why are you seeking to impose that condition at all? You can apply for subdivision, never act on it. What is the point of seeking subdivision application when it's sort of more a tokenistic thing?
The applicant made a number of suggestions in terms of the potential for the site to be transitioned and subdivided in the future. The site is zoned urban development, and the town's preference is residential development in the longer term across the site. So we acknowledge the need for workforce accommodation in the short term, but the condition really seeks to ensure the applicant follows through with their suggested subdivision. In terms of the timing for the lodgement of the application, we're open to being flexible for that to occur later within the 10-year time horizon. But we don't believe that it's appropriate to delete the condition.
Okay. Thank you for that. Unless there are any more questions of the staff, we might move to the report. In front of us, we have a report recommending approval for the proposal subject to a number of conditions. I will seek a mover and seconder for the recommendation. Anyone wish to move that recommendation? Thank you, Karen Hyde. Anyone wish to second it? Thank you, Jean Coltaz. Karen, would you like to speak as mover?
Thank you. I think this is an interesting application which combines some grouped housing with workforce accommodation. I think it does go towards providing some stability and sustainability for the town of Port Hedland, particularly in South Hedland. I'm quite familiar with the area. So I think that, that is welcome, moving away from absolute workforce accommodation and out-of-town workforce accommodation to aspects which assist with integrating and adding the potential for permanent housing to the supply. Quite a lot has gone from elsewhere in the town, particularly in the western precinct. The development meets the objectives, I think, of the urban development zone of Local Planning Scheme 7. It does provide a variety. I don't see there being any issue with there not being a structure plan or a local development plan. I don't see that there's any conflict or prejudice to future planning through this application. Comfortable with the parking analysis, the residential code analysis, and note that generally it meets the local planning policies. So I'm quite comfortable to support the application. Perhaps I can propose some amendments, presiding member. And let's start with the easy ones first. And referring to the end of the condition list and conditions 21, 22 and 23, I would like to move to an advice note.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that proposed amendment? Thank you, Jean. Yes.
Simply, I find that they are advisory rather than absolute conditions. So I think that they belong better outside of the suite of conditions and just as advice notes.
Can I just check those numbers again?
Yes, 21, 22 and 23.
Member Coltaz, do you wish to speak?
No.
All right. Does any other member wish to speak for or against that amendment? Councillor Blanco?
Thank you. No, for the amendment, no, not for the amendment.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, let's vote on that amendment. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Back to you, Member Hyde.
Yes, thank you. I would like to propose for condition 11, the deletion of condition 11 and at the same time adding words to condition 8, which would acknowledge that the detailed landscape plan shall be prepared and approved as new wording. Also, the penultimate dot point under F to include the words within the site boundary, and to add letters H and modify letter I to include a reference to landscape planting, particularly mature large pot size or fast growing species as a remedy for shading car parks.
Okay, so can I just confirm, is that that is as per requested by the
Indeed.
applicant?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, do I have a seconder for that amendment? Jazz, do you wish to speak further to that?
The reason is, I think, aesthetically, environmentally, the use of trees for shading, and to provide some shelter and rigour to the layout of car parking is preferable to shade structures. And I think that the proposal that the applicant has put forward, I think, would be a better option. I think there might be some unnecessary costs involved in the shade structures for some of this area.
Thank you. So can I just clarify before we move ahead with this one? You're seeking to delete condition 11.
Yes.
You're seeking to make the amendments to condition 8.
Yeah.
Are you seeking to amend subpoint G under condition 8 to delete the last few words under
Yes.
condition C?
Thank you
which
for
is
pointing that
evenly
out.
throughout the parking areas except where bays are covered. Can we delete, are you suggesting you wish to delete except where bays are covered?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Jean Coltes, just to speak to that.
No, just that I was going to mention G as part of it, but no, it just makes sense to go with the largest mature trees as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak for or against the amendments to deletion of 11 and amendment to 8? No? All right, let's vote on that amendment. All those in favour? Carried unanimously.
Thank you. Amendment 3, presiding member, I propose to delete condition 13, referring to subdivision.
Do I have a second for that?
Second that.
Speak to that.
I think it's premature, presiding member.
Jean Coltes, do you wish to speak?
Yes, look, a lot can happen in 10 years. No necessity to prepare a subdivision application. Not only these days are they expensive to lodge, but there also is a lot of information that you've got to provide as part of the subdivision application in terms of servicing, etc., and traffic impact and so forth. It's just unnecessary if the application doesn't go ahead in the future. And a lot can happen. I mean, the site might be used for aged person housing or some other form of development in the future that we don't know about, so it's unnecessary.
Thank you. I will add to that very briefly, picking up on a comment that was made earlier, that subdivision plan may well be lodged, may well be approved, and it'll lapse before the end of the 10-year period. So it really is an unnecessary impost on any landowner to do something like that, in my view. Any other debate on that suggested amendment? No? Councillor Blanco? Can't hear you, sorry.
Sorry about that. In relation to the subdivision application, I believe that we should allow that to happen. I know the majority of the council don't believe that to be the case, but in the history of these applications, they have suggested to the community that specific things are going to be, done, like the site will predominantly move to residential, and that is the reason why I think this subdivision application was suggested. So we're clear that that is the direction of the site, but history has shown that with all of these applications that come to the town of Port Hedland on a FIFO a FIFO camp transitioning to residential, it never eventuates, and we end up with a vacant block of land again at the end of the period, and there has been no effort put in to actually transition it from a FIFO to a residential development.
Thank you, councillor. Member Hyde, do you wish to close?
Thank you for highlighting that, elected member. The applicant has suggested some alternate wording to condition 3, which we could foreshadow as a further amendment to provide some clarity. Excuse me, sorry. So that's something that we can consider as a further amendment. I could foreshadow something of that nature.
Thank you. Let's deal with the deletion of condition 13 then. All those in favour? Against? 3-1. Thank you, carried. Back to you, Member Hyde.
The next amendment to condition 4 would be to take on board the wording of the applicant, which changes the timeframe from within 12 months of this approval to at least 12 months prior to the expiry of workforce accommodation approval.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that amendment?
Second that.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak?
I accept the applicant's approach to this, that a lot can change, and mindful that other technologies and considerations will come into play over the next 7, 8, 9 years, and I think that that becomes therefore a more reasonable and appropriate wording for this condition.
Thank you.
Same thing as with the subdivision application, preparation of a decommissioned site rehabilitation plan now is just unnecessary in my opinion. A lot can happen on the site, and in future uses I don't think it's what's being done now.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak for or against that amendment? Councillor Blanco?
Thank you. I'll speak against the amendment. Again, history has shown that these camps that are approved in Hedland have had problems with when they come to end of life. They are not decommissioned. They are left there to basically rot. And then the town has to pick up the cost of removing the camp. The town has had to pay out millions of dollars previously in sorting these problems out. So there absolutely should be a clause in there to ensure that the decommissioning of the camp happens after the end of life of that camp. And like I say, we have in the past had to pay millions of dollars out to decommission these camps and get rid of them because they have just been left abandoned.
Thank you, councillor. I'll speak briefly to the amendment proposed. Just to clarify from my perspective, I don't think that amendment is suggesting there is no decommissioning plan. It just suggests that it doesn't have to be done now because a lot can change in the next 10 years. It requires that it gets done before 12 months of the end of the 10-year period. So I think that is not removing the requirement for that plan. It's just pushing it out a little bit. So the concerns you have, Councillor Blanco, about it not happening will not be realised by the changes to the condition as suggested. You wish to close on that amendment?
I think I'd just like to reinforce that the way that the proposed wording works is that there needs to be a decommissioning and site rehabilitation plan. The suggested amendment I'm making is simply to change the timing of when that is provided. But this condition also requires that the DSRP shall be implemented at the end of the approval. So it certainly gives that certainty to the town that that decommissioning should take place.
Thank you, Member Hyde. We'll put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. Carried. Back to you, Member Hyde.
I think this is my last amendment, Amendment 5, and that is for condition 3. It's a little unusual, but I am reasonably comfortable with the alternate wording that the applicant has proposed, and that would be my amendment to take on board that revised wording to condition 3.
Let's have a look. Do I have a seconder for that amendment?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Do you wish to speak further to that?
As I say, it's a little unusual for a condition to foreshadow something like permanent residential, but the word "or" is there as well, so that my understanding now of this revised condition would be that when the workforce accommodation approval lapses at the end of the 10-year timeframe, and in accordance with the decommissioning and site rehabilitation plan, that there is foreshadowing that this location would transition to permanent residential, or there is an alternate plan for it under the decommissioning and site rehabilitation plan, and that is to the satisfaction of the town of Port Hedland. So again, I find that gives some certainty in response to the elected members' concerns for this location.
Thank you. Member Coltaz, a seconder. Do you wish to?
Yeah, I'm satisfied with the wording "or." I don't think, once again, 10 years' time, we're not sure as to what the zoning for the land will be or what alternate uses might crop up in the meantime. So I don't think there's a power to make a landowner subdivide their land. If the council wants to see it transition to permanent residential, it can insist on or undertake the preparation of a structure plan for the locality as well to show exactly what it wants. But the zoning will guide what can go on the site anyway.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak for or against that amendment? Councillor Blanco.
Thank you. I'd like to speak against, and the proposal has been advertised to the people of Hedland as a camp, FIFO camp, with a residential component attached to it. And by, deleting or amending to suggest that, it transitions to residential, after the use or the 10-year approved use of the land, conflicts with what the applicant has advertised to the people. The people of Hedland have understood that this proposal is going to be a FIFO camp, or predominantly or 50-50, and that there'll be a large portion of it that will be residential. So, that's what the people expect. That's what's been advertised to the people. That's what they expect. They don't expect it to be transitioning to residential after the 10-year lease has expired. So, again, it just shows the same tactics have been used with previous camps that have been advertised to the people of the town as going to a residential, component, and in actual fact, it will just be a FIFO camp effectively. And at the end of the camp's life, we're not going to have any residential housing on this block. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councillor Blanco. I'll speak briefly to the amendment. I think that the wording suggested by the applicant actually strengthens the position of the city or the town. The town's condition just states that the workforce accommodation component is temporary. And this amendment talks about that. It makes it clearer exactly when that will happen. And it makes it clearer that once that 10 years is up, something else will happen on the site. It'll either be decommissioned or it will be transitioned to a permanent residential use in line with the structure plan vision and the planning strategy vision for the town. So I think it actually does exactly what the town is asking. It just makes it clearer. All right, let's, do you wish to close?
Well, only to confirm what you've just said and to say that there's nothing in this condition that changes the fact that today we're asked to approve a series of townhouses as well as the workforce accommodation. The changes to this condition only apply to that temporary approval for the workforce accommodation and highlights the potential for use for residential development post. So I believe that it is actually consistent with what has been advertised to the community with that outlined subdivision plan.
Thank you. With that, I will put this amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Back to you, Member Hyde.
Thank you. I don't have any further amendments to make. I did consider the applicant's proposals for conditions 7 and 12, but on reflection, they were not amendments that I wished to make. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Coltaz, as seconder to the primary motion, the floor is yours.
Yes, look, the development presents as a high quality, well-designed and appropriate mix of facilities and residential accommodation types, both short and long term. It's been through a thorough assessment process for a number of issues. It's compatible with the local planning framework in that it is residential. It's considered as acceptable through the Responsible Authority Report assessment process. It does introduce a use that was previously on the site and in a more contemporary type of development. The predominant land use is acceptable as temporary accommodation, but it also introduces some permanent development. The design and built form was assessed and shows that it'll enhance the local amenity. The landscape and built form are well integrated. The traffic generated doesn't detrimentally impact the road system, and traffic operations from a servicing point of view are not detrimental either. They show how the site can be serviced appropriately. The accommodations open to a number of workforce groups, not just mining, but other people that are requiring short-term and long-term accommodation. It'll contribute to the local community as well through the integration of local resources, and the local economic situation will be improved through the expenditure that's provided by the occupants, the residents. The longer term use of the site has been thought about, and there are conditions that we've imposed on that in terms of future residential. The council's aspirations have been recognised in that, and at the appropriate time a site planning can go ahead with the structure plan. The development shown through extensive technical reports that it's an appropriate use, and I think the fact that the facilities within it will be open to the local community is something that enhances the social integration of the proposed development. So all in all, I'm supportive of it.
Thank you. Councillor Blanco, do you wish to speak to the primary motion?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to speak against the motion or the development, and outline that, like I've said previously, we've seen these proposals before many times, where local people have been told the development is going to produce a certain outcome. And that outcome is not achieved. That history has shown that to be the case many, many times. And at the end of the life of these camps, we end up with a vacant block of land that's left, in a disgraceful state. Now, I'm not saying that these people are going to do that, but history has shown that is what happens in places like Port Hedland. Now, I would definitely would have liked to have seen a decommissioning, a decommissioning report or a statement in this proposal, because, like I've said before, we have been through this before, and the town ends up having to pay for camps that are abandoned, that are sold mid life of the planning proposal, that are sold into different hands and so on, and then the camp is closed down or abandoned, and the town ends up wearing the costs of decommissioning the site and taking it back to a vacant land. Now, the other thing here is this proposal has been sold to the people as a FIFO camp, with a majority component being residential. But, when we have a look at the proposal, it's clear that it is just basically a FIFO camp with a couple of, residential units on there. Not what has been sold to the people. The people understand that this will be a site that will transition to residential living, and that is exactly what the sort of planning approvals we should be accepting for our town, not short-term fixes that end up having a vacant block of land at the end of it with no infrastructure on there. We have had significant interest in this proposal from the local people, and they're opposed to another camp being put in the centre of South Hedland. And I do note that there was another FIFO camp that was in this position. And when that was decommissioned last time, the suggestion was this site would transition to a residential living area. And clearly that's not happening, and we're going back to, the camp situation. In relation to the traffic impact, there will be significant impact to the traffic generated by a camp like this. The road infrastructure is at capacity currently. When when people are commuting to work, early in the morning and late at night, there is issues with a traffic flow, and this is just going to add to that issue, as well as the parking requirements that are clearly, in my opinion, have not been adequately provided for. And, as a local member of the community, you can see, when people are at home, there is a significant parking issues within that precinct, and that area around South Hedland. So this just adds to those problems. And now I note that, the committee is in favour of the the proposal. As a local resident and who's been engaged significantly about this proposal, the community is not in favour of a proposal like this to be put in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Blanco. Right, I might talk to the primary motion. Before I do, I'd like to move another series of amendments. The first one being amend condition 6 relating to urban water management in line with the wording suggested by the applicant. Do I have a seconder for that amendment? Yes. Thank you, Member Hyde. The reason I'm seeking to amend that doesn't change the intent of the condition, but it is certainly more specific and accurate about what is actually required by the condition, and it improves the grammar and the flow of the condition. Do you wish to speak a second?
No, I'm fine with that, thank you.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak for or against that amendment? No? All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Then condition 14, which requires a social contribution to the value of 550,000, I am moving an amendment to delete that condition. Do I have a seconder? No? All right, that amendment then lapses for want of a seconder. I seek to move a further amendment to delete condition 15, requiring construction of a footpath. Do I have a seconder for that amendment? Thank you, Member Hyde. The reason for that is the land is state-owned land managed by the Water Corporation, who have indicated they've got plans to carry out substantial infrastructure works on the land. They're not willing to accept third-party development on it. There's also no underlying planning mechanism. We're not talking about capital works programs here. Planning mechanism to warrant the condition and no demonstrated need or nexus for the condition. I did pick up on the city's comment that they understand that Water Corp is not keen for this to occur, so the applicant could put it inside the property boundary. I don't think that's appropriate to put a public footpath inside a private property. And certainly it would require a redesign of a number of things, so I don't support that. Do you wish to speak?
I concur with your comments, and I think given that condition 14 is still there, then that provides a contribution whereby if the city wishes to pursue this footpath in the future, then they would have some capital there from that contribution to do so. Like you, I'm somewhat concerned about the absolute need and nexus for this, given that the planning framework has still yet to be finalised in relation to this footpath link. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak for or against that member?
Speak for it. I don't think we're in a position to impose conditions on other persons' lands at this point in time.
Thank you. Any other member wish to speak for or against the amendment? Councillor Blanco.
Thank you, Member. I would like to speak against the amendment for the simple fact that if the developer does not build the footpaths required for the linkage, then the town will have to do that when the complaints come rolling in because of the amount of people that are using the facility and there's no linkage within footpaths. Obviously, we will then have an issue with safety, and then the bill will then have to be sorted by the town of Port Hedland. So as they propose this development move forward, and as we're obviously going to approve the development, then I would rather see the developer pay for these sort of contributions to their development to service the people that they are servicing within this development. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Blanco. As mover, I do not wish to say anything in closing that amendment. I'll put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Against? That amendment is carried. Thank you. I then seek to amend condition 19 relating to the operational management plan as suggested by the applicant. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Member Hyde. The reason I wish to amend it is the amended wording doesn't change the intent of the condition at all, but it is more appropriate from a planning sense and it's grammatically correct. Do you wish to?
No, I'm comfortable with that.
Any member wish to speak for or against that amendment? No? We'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Similarly, amend condition 20 related to external lighting as suggested by the applicant for the same reason. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Member Hyde. Does any member wish to speak for or against that amendment? No? Let's put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. And then lastly, delete condition 24 requiring implementation of the decommissioning and site rehabilitation plan. This is already covered in condition 4. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Member Hyde. Does any member wish to speak for or against that amendment? No, let's put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, that is carried. Reverting to the primary motion, I'm prepared to support the recommendation for approval. It's clear there's a demand and a need for workforce accommodation in their town, not only for FIFO workers, but also for essential key service workers to support the community. It also appears the demand for housing is impacting the availability of tourist accommodation. And it appears it's very difficult to make the development of new permanent residential developments stack up in the current environment. Given this, I commend the applicants on seeking to develop a large and unused puzzle piece in the town's fabric. Commend them for inclusion of a permanent residential component, which I do feel is quite substantial as a first stage. And I commend you on the quality of the accommodation and the landscaping proposed. I note that the proposal has been reviewed by the town's design review panel. Issues raised by the panel have been addressed through additional information and refinements to the design. Although there's no structure plan in place to guide the development, the nature and the design of the proposal is compatible with the surrounding uses, won't prejudice future development on the site or integration with the broader area. And most notably, in my view, the design and location of proposed group dwellings will contribute positively to and enhance the existing streetscape. I know there's some community concern about potential traffic impacts, but traffic ingress and egress will be limited to Kennedy Street, and the traffic impact assessment shows the local road network can manage peak traffic movements even when modelled at worst case scenario, and an operational plan can further manage the traffic concerns raised by the community, so I'm happy to support. Member Hyde, you moved the primary motion. Would you like to close?
No, I don't think I've got anything more to say. Thank you.
Thank you. We will then move to a vote on the primary motion as amended by a series of amendments. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Moving then to item 4, Form 2 DAP applications for the town of Port Hedland. There are nil. Section 31 SAP reconsiderations. So with that, I thank Councillor Blanco for your attendance and participation, and I thank the presenters for being here today. And before we move on to Part C, the City of Busselton, I'm going to move a procedural motion for a short bathroom break, very quickly seconded by Member Hyde. All those in favour? Great. Thank you. We will be back in 5 minutes.
You're on.
Right, we are back. Welcome back, everybody, to the DAP meeting. We are moving now into parts the City of Busselton, and with that, I welcome Councillor Anne Ryan and Councillor Kate Cox, our local government DAP members from the City of Busselton, to the panel. Item 1 is declaration of due consideration. Panel members need to have considered all the documentation contained within Part C of the agenda and the Part C related information, noting that 2 R13 direction responses were published on the 23rd of July 2025, one for an alternate resolution and one for further information. And I also note that subsequent information has been received and emailed as late this morning. So with that, I just need to check, have panel members had an opportunity to review all the information that has been sent through? By a show of hands, please. Thank you. I am going to battle the City of Busselton. I am going to battle to see voting. You all seem to be a little far away. Just letting you know. So if I don't see your vote, I might ask you to state it verbally as we get to that point. Can I just confirm that both councillors have been able to review the information?
No, Sam, they're on mute.
Just ask them if they can zoom in as well.
On mute anyway.
Yeah.
Councillors Ryan and Cox, can you hear me?
Anyone hear me?
I'm asking them to.
It didn't look like they responded to Dale's question.
They did put their hand
No,
Oh,
we
did they?
They did, yeah.
I couldn't see it. I couldn't hear it.
no, we've started.
We're going to move, so hopefully you can get a bigger screen of us, if that's okay.
That's all good. Can I just very quickly confirm that you both have had the opportunity to review the information?
Yes, we have.
Yes.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. Moving then on to item 2, disclosures of interest. I haven't received any disclosures of interest to this point. Do any members wish to make any declarations of interest in relation to this item? And could I check with our local government members whether this application has been before you at a council meeting or a briefing?
I confirm no, it hasn't been formally to council,
I also confirm the same.
and I'll have no declarations of interest.
Thank
And
you.
no
Have councillors been briefed informally on the proposal?
Did we have an informal briefing?
Informal briefing, yes.
An informal briefing, yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. Look, I note the standing declaration that if councillors, if an agenda item has been considered at a council meeting, and in this case, a briefing of all elected members, you're not bound by any decisions and you didn't make any, I'm assuming, at that briefing, and you do undertake to exercise independent judgment to this matter. I'm very happy for you to continue participating in the meeting. Moving then on to item 3, Form 1 DAP applications. Item 3.1 is Lot 501 1074, Cape Naturalist Road Naturalist, proposed use not listed, tourism and visitor accommodation, DAP number 24/02813. We have a series of presentations on this item today. We've got Sean McGiven from KHA speaking against the recommendation in the report. We've got Peter Hillman from Urbis speaking against the recommendation in the report. We've got Anthony Rowe from Emerge and Kirsten Knox from Envision Bushfire Planning speaking against the recommendation in the report. And we have Dion White from Hatch speaking against the recommendation in the report. I also note that written submissions have been received from Belinda Morridge from Morridge and Moore and from Tourism WA. I will just remind you that under our standing orders, you each have 3 minutes for your presentation. It's going to be a long day for this meeting, so I'm going to keep you to those 3 minutes. I'm going to call time as you get close. Please just remember that we have read everything that you have sent through, and we will be asking you questions. So you'll have lots of time to clarify any points through that process. What I'm going to do is ask you to all run through your 3-minute presentations, and then I think we'll leave questions of the team to the end, if that's okay by you. Right, with that, we will then start with Sean. And Sean, your time starts whenever you are ready.
Okay, thank you very much to the panel. The proposed design is a response to the regional context of southwestern Australia as a destination, the local context of the Natural East area, and the more specific site context seen here with the Pullman Resort to the north, Bunkers Bay to the north also with the beach, and the sort of transition of landscape natures that we have both from the bushland through to the coast. Here again, you can see from this aerial view the Pullman Resort to the north and the site highlighted with various other features in the surrounding area. The site itself offers a number of opportunities given the nature of the seasonal creek bed, the topography, the existing flora and fauna, and also the sort of views that it has afforded towards the ocean beyond. The master plan proposes 10 chalets, a mixture of 2 and 3 bedroom chalets, accessed from Bunker Bay Road. The chalets themselves are nestled into the existing landscape with minimal removal of any vegetation, and also making use of the existing tracks that exist on the site, along with a communal building servicing the sort of communal needs of the residents or the people using the chalets. This nestled nature of the chalets can be seen, the transition from the circulation path to the chalets themselves. These are a mixture of 2-bedroom chalets accessed off an open area which works into the internal spaces, and 2 bedrooms, which can also be expanded to a 3-bedroom unit. Significant consideration has been given to the environmental conditions through natural ventilation, solar shading, and also the bushfire conditions on the site. So the massing of the chalets gives consideration to being nestled within the vegetation, but also that sort of transition through the site, through the building. And also pays respect to the use of materials which are in context to the location, and also minimise the visual impact of the chalets. The communal building located further up the hill on the site affords a space for the people using the chalets to enjoy the communal experiences on the site, both through living and dining. And it also provides a refuge zone as part of the bushfire plan. This building also draws upon the vernacular language that we have in the southwest of verandas and the modulation of the roof forms, the transparency and openness of the building and the living experience given to those using it, and also the material language with the use of rammed earth, timbers and metal roofs.
You are at your time, so I'll ask you to wrap up.
So this, having been presented to the design panel, was the Busselton's design review panel was endorsed with the proposal as submitted has the potential to be an outstanding example of this type of development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Peter Hillman, over to you, and your time starts when you're ready.
Thank you. Yeah. Peter Hillman, I undertook a visual impact assessment for the site. Today I'll run through the scope, some of the discussions, and also some of the key views for discussion.
Ask you to speak up just a little bit. We're a bit far away from you.
Sure thing. So the assessment began with a detailed scoping that was discussed with the City of Busselton. And our first exercise was to prepare a viewshed analysis, which you can see on screen here. And the purpose of that was to identify areas of potential visibility throughout the site without assuming a widespread impact. And then we could narrow in on them, ground truth them, and consider vegetation and built form for potential screening as well. The methodology assessed 12 public viewpoints initially, and then we developed 5 into photo montages to convey potential impact. And the findings really showed that the visibility of the proposed development was limited, and this was due to predominantly vegetation, topography, but also available viewing angles in the public area. Following this, we consulted with both the City of Busselton and DPLH, and we received some feedback with respect to the assessment, and there was some requests for additional refinement of the assessment and also additional viewpoint testing. A key element of discussion was with respect to the proposal. The chalets were essentially accepted in terms of the visual impact, and the communal building was the element of the design that they wanted to be tested, I suppose, with respect to visual impact. And key for us was the communal building in its scale and finish is really comparable to many other developments in the broader area, and in fact, the materiality from a visual perspective doesn't contrast greatly with that of the surrounding area. So then we looked at some, in discussion with DPLH, there were a number of viewpoints that we looked at. Cape Naturalist Road was certainly important. We identified 7 viewpoints on Cape Naturalist Road, and you can see a couple on screen. And importantly, it's very highly screened along Cape Naturalist Road with natural vegetation. You're also travelling at 80 kilometres per hour. There are some glimpses, and you can see 2 on screen here, but you have to really step off the road and walk up to the vegetation to see through. And you can see here on the right of screen, that's a typical view through to the water there. Now on the left, there was a view, an entry to the site that was identified by DPLH.
Are at your time, so I'll ask you to wrap up.
I think the intent is that you really need to step off the road to see these views. It's not a normal viewing condition, really. We'd looked at other views like the lighthouse. Importantly here, it was expressed that the proposed development would stand out in terms of an introduction of built form, but you can clearly see on this screen and also a broader panorama that there's other elements. Just beneath the lighthouse, we have the museum and gift shop and these power poles as well, and then surrounding elements like the existing resort. Other views were taken into account, and what we're seeing is they're really well visually absorbed by the existing condition, existing vegetation and topography. And in summary, our assessment identified a low moderate visual impact broadly, and typically most views were low visual impact.
Thank you very much for that. Anthony Rowe and Kirsten Knott.
Thank you. The proposal for commercial developments to residential development, the guidelines make exceptions for commercial developments. We've responded to the risk. It's a complex site. It's compromised by both visual impacts and also vegetation. We've responded to those constraints by national construction standards that are recognised nationally to provide both a construction standard that's resistant to bushfire, as well as providing a standard that provides tenability for shelter in the shelter that we've identified. The site itself, you can see over to the west side, you've got the contiguous vegetation. The east side is more mixed. Fires tend to come from the east side. Sorry, the clicker's jammed.
All right, I've paused it.
Sorry, got to go back. You can see that the site is predominantly grass. You've got forest vegetation to the west, and the site is actually at the coast as well. Next slide shows the BAL ratings. Now those BAL ratings, there's 2 BAL rating sets there. There's one to the building construction standard, which is method 1. It uses routine BAL ratings, and there's the method 2, which is based on a higher flame temperature, which is used for external refuge. So just to bear in mind that that second one is based on the consideration of open exposure to personnel. That's why it's set at 1,200 and why buildings are set at normally routine. But in this particular case, we've identified that the building in terms of an open refuge bow at 1,200 would actually fall within our 29, but the shelter component would actually be at 19. When I say that's standard, that's standard enough. In terms of clearing, we're not proposing any clearing around the individual cabins. It's intended that those buildings have resistance to the national standard for flame zone. The shelter itself, which you can see has got the APZ around it, that's to provide tenability inside the building for it to be suitable as a shelter. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Dion White from Hatch.
Thank you very much. So from the outset, I guess the key guiding strategic framework for this region is really the LNAP plan, and that does two fundamental things. It nominates Bunker Hill as a tourist node, and it's really the only tourist node on that portion of the peninsula that gets that designation. And importantly also does nominate its landscape value, but it's in the, I guess, somewhat secondary rural landscape edge. The fundamental tension around this application, and undeniably it is reasonably complex, but what it requires is a really nuanced consideration of the balance of bushfire visual impact and the tourism objectives. And if any of one of those things gets considered or given too much weight and consideration, it really is working against almost the opposite of the objectives for the other aspects. So bushfire rates too heavily, that impacts visual assessment, that impacts the tourism experience. And fundamentally, SPP 2 talks about that need for that nuanced balance and consideration between all those three key areas. There has been extensive collaboration over a long period of time, including extensive collaboration pre-lodgement. Also include the design review, which had resounding support, only one review required, which is an unprecedented side of the sensitivity, particularly given the landscape issues. Land use and servicing issues have been worked through and resolved. Been extensive post-lodgement refinement around the visual impact and the bushfire work, and additional detailed submissions put in around that. The tourism experience, again, really ticks every box of what SPP for the LNAP strategy is talking about in terms of low key, diverse offer. Tourism WA have reiterated their very strong support for the proposal as a really important contribution to the southwest Margaret River Busselton region. Visual impact, again, was a key focus of the DRP and gave really strong support for that aspect. And then the bushfire management issues obviously have been quite complex, but really boil down to the interaction between the BNP and the BRRN. Our understanding of the Welber advice is, whilst they are two separate pieces of legislation, clearly as a more site-specific understanding of bushfire risk for this proposal, it's reasonable the BNP would direct the bushfire notice in perpetuity. And certainly Warcliffe Houses, that decision has reiterated the ability to do that. From a legal point of view, and there's additional legal advice that's been provided in recent days. Shelter in place, obviously, again, is a fundamental part of the performance solution that's available under FPP. It is an aspect that wasn't supported by DFS, but has been supported and acknowledged by DPLH Bushfire Branch. In terms of the recommendation, certainly our preference is the alternate recommendation for approval. In terms of the condition, there's a bunch of conditions that are reasonably standard and acceptable from our point of view. There's a core of conditions around condition 3 in particular that to us imply an altogether different development, which really is not resolving the key issues that bring us to the table today. And the recommendation for refusal, so we'd simply ask that a number of those be deleted and we get back to the core support of the proposal as it sits. And particularly that can be reinforced through the draft condition that's been provided in terms of the core bushfire issues, which again is derived from the Warcliffe DAP precedent.
Thank you very much. All right, if we can minimise that presentation so we can see our Busselton members. I'm going to start with our Busselton members first. Councillors Ryan and Cox, do you have questions of the presenters? I can't hear you. Does anyone have questions of the presenters?
Not of those presenters, but do we have other staff there?
We'll move to the staff in a little while, so let's just deal with these. Do you have any questions of these presenters?
I don't know.
No. Thank you. All right, any members in the room, questions of the presenters? Over to you, Member Hyde.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I have quite a few. So, first of all, Sean, on the images that you showed, the aerials, just a little further up the slope behind where the communal building is, and this is just for my information, there appears to be a sort of circle or a remnant. It looks as though it's perhaps a former building or something.
No, I think it was a bit of groundwork that the landowner was doing at the top. They were taking out a few rocks to do some work along the property.
Okay, lovely, thank you. That was just by way of information. My question to you in relation to this is the DPLH have commented through their review of the VIA about the materiality of the communal building. And this is probably to your colleague as well. What do you say in response to that? You talked about the vernacular, you talked about the use of local materials. In your design, have you sought to consider that as part of the visual?
Yeah, well, look, our approach and in terms of the design is, as a practice, we always try and look at the context and landscape of any project, and every project should be off that context and landscape. One of the materials that we thought was quite interesting for this site was that tradition that the Southwest has of rammed earth or rammed limestone, which is very much a tradition now, which is actually a lot of contemporary architecture. It's quite sustainable material, it's quite practical, quite easily built in that region. The other materials that we were looking at was the sort of use of the metal roof language that we have within that sort of vernacular. And also we were keen to sort of have a language to that materiality which spoke to a metal roof, that it was sloped. It wasn't this ultra contemporary architecture that sort of was this sort of flat roof language. The pitch of the roof almost plays with the topography and in a sense sort of mitigates that visual impact that we have on the site. And then some other features are that idea of the veranda language of buildings that people are familiar with, that we have that sort of open veranda structure that is in keeping with the area.
Thank you. In terms of the vegetation, I'm not sure if this is to Kirsten, but I think so. This area was previously pasture land, agricultural land. Even the Pullman Resort at one point was just nothing. I remember going there about 30 years ago when there was very little there. So of what's on the particular development site at present that you've identified, how much of that is revegetation and, just seeded from what's around, or how much of it is actually remnant vegetation? And could you also talk to the quality of what's there, please? Because I think in your report you do identify some good and small pockets of very good, but there seems to be a broader emphasis in the RAR that suggests that it's potentially of higher value.
Before you respond to that, because you may as well respond to the whole thing. So one of the reasons of refusal used in the Responsible Authority report is the removal of significant areas of native vegetation classified as being in good and very good condition. So in responding to Member Hyde's question, could you just tell us how much vegetation is proposed to be removed?
Very little. We haven't done a specific count, but it would be under half a hectare, I think. It's probably in the 2,000 square metre range, so like a couple of average houses sort of thing. That's about it, because it's the defendable space, so it's the building footprint for the chalets and the little bit of defendable space. All the tracks are existing tracks, so there might be some minor pruning of some of the trees where they might come out into the track, but not full removal. And then the communal building is actually in an existing cleared area and there's no modification of veg. So, and in the environmental report, the the survey work that was done actually covered like a much bigger area, and so the higher, including land holdings to the south and to the north, and the better quality vegetation is actually more to the east, so actually away from where we are. It's predominantly marri, some flooded gum and peppermint trees that are following like a waterway, and there's actually quite a lot of weed, so arum lily and stuff in the understory, which the proponent's actually been trying to get control of and manage regardless of an approval. And then, so the trees are more remnant, so they would be in the 60 plus years of age, whether they were cleared, you know, way back before any of us kind of have records, hard to tell a little bit. And then there's smaller regrowth shrubs and things that have come through, but quite common shrubs that have come through.
Yeah. Address your question. It does. Thank you. I note on some of the analysis there are categorisations of fuel loads associated with landscape, and I note that the Pullman Resort is identified as a low fuel zone. In terms of the proposal to, I guess, do some landscape, how has that notion of fuel zone been taken into account in the landscape plan?
So the forest classification, which has been applied to basically where there's any tree canopy and a bit around, accounts for revegetation. So it's kind of like the highest fuel load you can assume. And even though we're kind of missing the mid-story and a lot of the understory with the vegetation currently, the forest classification includes basically adding back in different layers of vegetation. Right. So we haven't assumed revegetation in the grass, in the paddock areas, because the intent for the proponent is still to have some grazing in line with like the current uses. But where there's vegetation, that's basically we've factored the potential for the fuel load to increase with the classification that's been applied, which is informing the battle flame, like the flame zone construction for the chalets. Because I guess the alternative could have been keeping everything managed underneath, just removing everything under the vegetation and having it as a low threat. But that wasn't, with the experience, wasn't the long-term land goal for the proponent, which was to put back values. Yep. So that's sort of how those two have kind of talked to each other.
Okay, thank you for that. My next questions, I think, are for Anthony. You're one of these rare level 3 qualified people, I gather.
Much more common than you think.
But just in terms of the language that's used around the potential for bushfire and the conditions that built form may find itself in, there are a number of different terms that are used both in your BMP in terms of the responses that have been received from DFES, the peer review, etc. And I wonder if you could provide some clarity around those. One of the key things seems to be around the design and construction of the shelter and 10 kilowatts per square metre. In some of your BMP, you talk about 60, 60, 60. And I think even in one of the peer review that I've read, there's mention of 19 kilowatts per square metre. So I wonder if you could provide some clarity for me as to what 60, 60, 60 versus 10 kilowatts per square metre means in real sense, and your consideration of the safety and risk factor associated with that communal building in that location.
I anticipate this question might come up. Yeah. So I asked for an extract from the National Refuge Guideline.
Yeah.
The issue of contention, if you see the first one, it talks about separation distance from vegetation.
You can't read that. Thank you.
just, go up a little bit. It separates issues from vegetation, and it provides two options. One is the 10 kilowatts, and one is the FRL 60-60-60. Now, FRL 60-60-60 is way more superior to 10 kilowatts. 10 kilowatts is more of a generic open space. If you can get it in there, then the construction requirements, the expectations are very low. An FRL of 60-60-60, now I need to actually also clarify that the flame zone FRL is 30-30-30. 60-60-60 exceeds the requirement for flame zone. So
Logically, it's double it.
The building needs to be able to maintain resistance
60
and also insulation for a minimum period of 60 minutes, whereas that doesn't apply at 10 kilowatts. There's no requirement at 10 kilowatts other than you achieve the spatial dimension. Now, the really important thing for a shelter is the internal tenability. We actually don't really care too much what's happening on the outside because we want people to survive on the inside. So the FRL is a lot more sophisticated because it's talking about the insulation properties of the building itself. It's talking about the resistance of the building to be able to sustain the level of heat that we anticipate, 60 minutes, but also provide the insulation factors for 60 minutes as well, on which we can then do the heat balance to determine what the tenability in the building itself is. What we actually find when we're designing shelters is the internal heat from the people themselves tends to be the greatest thing that we need to actually deal with. We can deal with the external heat quite easily. It's the internal generation of heat from the proximity of people to one another. So you'll see that we've recommended a 1.2 metre separation between people. The standard is 0.7, but we think 1.2 is better for keeping people cooler. So it tends to be a bit of a feedback loop in terms of tenability versus capacity. We've recently worked on one with regard to the Children's Hospice. We did a shelter design on that. The heat balance on that showed that in the rooms, the equipment itself was the major source of the heat generation, and that was the main thing that needed to be tackled. The issue from the outside can be addressed by the insulation properties of the walls and the treatments of the windows, so we can keep the heat out without too much difficulty. 60-60-60, I might also add, is the minimum commercial construction standard on a boundary for a commercial building, so it's a routine construction method. The industry is really familiar at constructing at 60-60-60, so it's not a big ask to say, oh, we want this to be 60-60. It's routinely available, we can do it.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. That helps a great deal. Can I understand from what you said then that the BMP proposes 60-60-60? And can I also assume or understand therefore that the work that Sean has done from an architectural point of view has designed to that 60-60-60 construction capability?
And we have a fire engineer who's also provided the prescription to achieve that, and the fire engineer will also be required to sign off the construction that it actually achieves the design. And a large part of the fire engineer's consideration is that aspect of heat balance and tenability.
Right. Okay. And you will have obviously seen the peer review that was done of one of your drafts of the BMP, which talked quite a lot to perhaps lack of clarity or some missing information in places. You revised the BMP after that peer review, is that correct?
It was. Most of the issues that were raised, though, weren't changed in the BMP. They didn't need to be changed. I'm quite disappointed with that peer review, and if you look at the basis for its engagement, I would suggest it's not a peer review, it's actually an advocacy. So there's no justification of any of the criticisms that are actually in that document. We've followed very closely the guidelines, and we've demonstrated today that the 10 kilowatts in the FRL, notwithstanding it's been disputed by DFIS that that's not what the guidelines provide, you can see quite clearly that is what the guidelines actually provides. And it's a superior outcome. So
Thank you.
That's my response.
Just one last question around this subject. I understand the communal building is out there, it's in the old paddock, it's got bits of grass and whatnot around it, and you can easily do an APZ of 25 metres or more if you wanted to, I guess. The chalets you're assuming are a tolerable risk, is that the right phrase, or a something or other risk that they're designed to a standard, but they're not a place for shelter. So at the worst case scenario, there may be damage or loss of those. You're allowing for, through the BMP, a 3 metre perimeter clearance area, which your BMP suggests is consistent, and I concur with that, it's consistent with the language used in the guidelines that support the SPP. But there seems to be some refuting of that from DFES to say, well, that's not adequate. Three metres is not adequate to defend the building. And I think your response then was, well, you're not supposed to get a vehicle in there, but it should be okay for people or something. So could you provide me some clarity around that?
So there's some confusion about what a defendable space actually means. It's not a space for actually defending a building.
Right.
3 metres, if you've got a fire 3 metres from you, you are not going to survive. So it's not a defendable space. If you want to have a defendable space, you need 50. So the buildings themselves are much tougher than what humans are. The 3 metre separation is for ember. So it's about ember accumulation and flammable materials next to the building, because that can actually change the rating on the building. So that's the intent of a defendable space. It's a historic word. It's been used for a long time, but it doesn't actually mean operational space for firefighting. One of the things that is really to probably bear in mind is the construction standard that we're using, and it came up in the WASAP Bunnings case, was that what is the purpose of emergency services attending a non-combustible building?
I know that case very well.
Therefore, does a non-combustible building support the safety of firefighters because they're not drawn to defend that building? And that's the argument that we actually make with regard to we've exceeded the requirements in terms of the construction for the placement. We don't want to remove vegetation for a range of reasons. The defendable space is really just that minimum space that gives you that separation from the building itself and any particular flammability. Having said that, the buildings themselves are already at non-combustible standards.
Okay, lovely, thank you. I'll leave my questions there. Thanks, Presiding Member.
I'm just going to build on those a little bit before we shift off them, if we could. So there's some strong commentary in the report that the application of tolerable loss to the chalets without APZs is not considered to respond to SPP 3.7 outcome to mitigate risk to people, in addition to property and infrastructure. And the report also says that sheltering on site in this location won't comply with the intent of SPP 3.7, which is to preserve life. Can you comment on that?
As I mentioned in my presentation, commercial and tourism developments are actually treated to residential development. There is a specific section that's actually put into the guidelines to deal with tourism and day uses, and it specifically provides the option for shelter of up to 100 people, recognising that these developments may be in places where the intrinsic attraction is actually the threat. So we either have this development or we don't. The state, and these guidelines are recent, has determined that we will have this development, and that to facilitate that we may need shelter. This is more common in coastal destinations, which typically have one road in. So if we had 2 roads, you could have a situation where you wouldn't be designing to as high a standard as what we're designing for. Notwithstanding, a through road can be overtaken by a fire and may not be accessible anyway. So the outcome that we've actually come up with is probably safer than most other situations. So through roads themselves are only good until they're overtaken. Quite often, even if you have a through road, the first announcement you might actually hear is it's too late to leave. What do you do then if you don't have shelter actually provided on site? So this is a much safer option where we've actually gone. The construction standard is much higher than the standard. The process for determining the shelter is followed the national standard. It's quite a
rigorous one. It's not intended that the buildings will be tolerable loss. This is kind of this transition that we had between version 1.4 of the guidelines and the new guidelines. So we don't really use the word tolerable loss, although there is reference in the guidelines that it may be acknowledged by the owner that it's a tolerable loss. The owner's expectation is, because these are being built to flame zone, that these buildings should survive. It would be a bad day if they didn't. If a building survives, occupants survive. It's not intended that occupants actually stay there. As I mentioned before, a fire approaching the cabins will be coming from the east and across grassland. And that's considered to be a mitigated condition that you can actually mitigate with space and construction. We're not intending people to shelter in those buildings, but if those buildings are designed to survive, any people that are in them will also survive. That's the historic fact.
So and that's a segue to my next question. There's a concern in the report about the distances from the chalets and the refuge between them. And they talk about 700 metres seems a long way to go if residents don't have a vehicle or are otherwise not able to use one. So can you just round out that commentary that you just made with a comment on that concern about the distance between the refuge and the chalet?
So depending on which direction the fire is coming from, will depend on whether people actually evacuate to the shelter, and on how much safe available time is. The facility itself will always be hosted, will always be the ability to provide instruction. The tenant or the occupants will always have mobile phone connection that does actually have mobile phone coverage at that particular site. In the old days, you might have had the cabins actually wired. These days, the guests actually register their mobile phone number. And so the host always has the ability to communicate with them. If you might be sheltering for up to a couple of hours if there's a fire nearby that may actually impact the site and it closes off the road to Dunsborough. If you've got plenty of time, then you move people into the shelter. And the distances that we're talking about, you could walk it, you could drive. They're not large distances. If it's a short onset fire, then the tenants would be advised to actually stay in the buildings themselves. As I mentioned, they're designed to actually withstand bushfire. They're intended to survive. And if buildings survive, then people survive. They have enough capacity to actually be able to manage the heat in the building as the fire goes through. The other thing is there's not a lot of fire fuels from the east. And so the evacuation is to the east. So even if a fire did come across from the east, it wouldn't have a lot of intensity because there's just not a lot of fuel that's actually approaching the cabins. Fire coming from the west comes through a contiguous vegetation of forest, but you've got more time to get to the shelter.
And the SAT decision that was used to support the city's legal position, I think we got that information through yesterday or this morning? This morning, includes reference to the chalets in that case not being constructed to an Australian Standard 3959 of 2018 standard. Picking up, and Belinda Morridge challenged that in the advice that we received late this morning. Picking up on that standard, can you just confirm for me, are you proposing to construct your chalets to that standard, or did I hear earlier that you're proposing to exceed that standard with your chalets? Anybody?
I'm familiar with that particular case. In that situation, the applicant didn't have any legal representation or professional representation. And in my view, some of the issues, they applied the general considerations of bushfire and not the specific provisions for tourism development and tolerable loss. Now that's something that's a matter of that case. In this situation, the buildings themselves are actually being built to resist bushfire. Those cabins hadn't been being promoted as tolerable loss, as in they'd just be lost. In this case, the applicant is intending not to lose the buildings. The reference to tolerable loss is really the carryover from version 1.4. So in this case, we are building to a national construction standard to actually resist the bushfire. It's not intended that the building will be destroyed. We're intending that they'll survive.
Okay. And then, and it might be a couple of people that answer these. So can I have some brief commentary on the ecological impacts of adhering to the bushfire risk reduction notice requirements? And have you modelled the visual impact in the event the city chose not to vary that notice in any given year and then you're required to clear? So have you done that modelling of what that would A, look like, and B, what that would mean ecologically?
In answer to the second part, no, we have not modelled that.
And if you're putting a 20-metre managed fuel zone around each of the chalets, most of the vegetation will get, you might get a few trees left in terms of being able to locate them, but a lot of it will get cleared out and thinned quite significantly. Okay.
If I could also answer that the fire break notice doesn't actually anticipate that these buildings have been built to flames.
Then if we can just go back to the peer review, there was a statement in there that the peer reviewer felt there's potential for a modified site plan layout or increased on-site vegetation management to improve the likelihood of the proposal meeting the requirements of SBP 3.7. Are you prepared to look at any modifications to move in that direction, or do you think you've actually got to the point where that is not necessary?
With regard to that peer review, he didn't give due consideration to the constraints that we're trying to work to, so he didn't recognise that that would jeopardise visual impact assessments. So he thought, well, why not put it in the grassland, which would be obviously one of the things you might do. We don't have that option without jeopardising another consideration. So disappointingly, the expectation under the Australian fire engineering guidelines for engaging a peer is that peer should actually consult with the author to actually be clear on what the BMP is actually doing and why it's doing it. That never happened. The first we actually saw in this peer review was when it was in the draft. So there had been no engagement with us to actually explain why you've done what you've actually done. So that's one of the failings, I think, of the engagement of that particular peer.
Okay, thank you. Member Cortez.
What's the capacity of the shelter? What's the capacity of the shelter?
Capacity of the shelter is, I think it's, we've got 64 people. The capacity of the shelter, I think, is 220.
And what's the sort of numbers that could be on site at peak operation?
64 is the maximum.
Sorry?
64 is the maximum number of people.
That are allowed to go there with visitors?
Yes. Based on how it's going to operate.
Okay. And out of Leadfield, was there any suggestion or view to build all these chalets in the cleared area and then supplement it over time with vegetation, fire-resistant vegetation?
It wasn't something that we were briefed on by the client. We have the client here, but as architects, the idea of the project was, I guess, that we were trying to explain at the start, was the asset that we had on the site was this beautiful seasonal creek set within these trees. The sort of paddocks had started to sort of finger into that landscape, and there were these opportunities to strategically nestle the chalets within zones which had been cleared a long time ago, but they sort of were able to be nestled in. There was then a bushfire strategy developed in tandem with that, which would allow for the chalets to be strategically placed, probably in something that offers the visitor a lot more of the context. And I guess that's what I was trying to say at the start. The design proposal is informed by the Southwest regional context as a destination. One of those, attractive things about the Southwest is that sort of remnant bushland and the ability to be able to nestle these properties within that and appreciate it, which it is absolutely stunningly beautiful.
I understand.
Whereas the paddock experience is probably not something that's unique to this site, and probably, therefore...
A long time to develop.
Yeah, and also that's probably why we're sitting here today having this conversation, is because the uniqueness of the development has probably presented the challenges that we have to, I suppose, make the most beautiful outcome that we can possibly achieve here.
I think it strikes the central challenge that it's all quite symbiotic and interdependent, and that it was just a deliberate move to give that day one experience immersed in the existing nature that's there from the cabin point of view, and being very careful about privacy between cabins and relationship to the creek line and the existing veg, and then contrasting that with the communal facility that had the outward views but was a rural style, very light impact building, so could respect the visual impact issue but could also provide the visitor experience of getting a view out to the site. We could have potentially gone out and chased views for all of the cabins by putting them out in an open paddock, but we just felt that wasn't the right thing to do from a visual impact point of view, and there was the additional issue of having to wait time for that to then be immersed in nature that we already had on that portion of the site.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Okay. We might then move on to inviting questions of the local government officers, and I believe we have Emma Craddock, Andrew Watts, Joanna Wilson and Rachel Runco with us today from the City of Busselton. I think we also have Michael Ball, Des Abel and Jackson Parker from DFES online, as well as Stephanie Clegg from the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage. I'm going to hand over for questions in a minute, but any questions, feel free to pick up the questions, whether you're from DFES or the City or DPLH, as they relate to you. I'm going to start with Councillor Ryan. Councillor Ryan, do you have any questions of the City staff?
Thank you, Presiding Member. I do. Sorry, not of the City staff, but of DFES, if I may.
Absolutely.
In relation to it's the emergency plan, I think. Is there any arrangement for somebody to be on site 24/7? I don't see anything in the report that says that there will be somebody on site. And if there is, where will the manager live or work?
Can I just check, is that a question for DFES or for the applicant team?
Well, it's probably, if I can word it differently, it's probably for the applicant as well. But would DFES think that there would be a requirement for somebody to be there, especially given that fires don't just happen during the day?
DFES, do you want to respond to that question? Do you have that expectation?
I guess the kind of bushfire emergency evacuation plan is that it's better to have a plan than not have a plan. And it is part of the SPP 3.7 and the guidelines. However, it doesn't necessarily reduce the risk by having a plan. So DFES don't really assess the bushfire evacuation plans and put a lot of weight on them as far as a measure that reduces the risk compared to hazard separation and having multiple access and egress points.
Does that address your question, Councillor Ryan?
Could I then perhaps ask the fire consultant if they could answer the question of if there will be an on-site manager presence? Sure. And if so, where will they live or work? Because there doesn't seem to be anything in the plans of accommodation for somebody on site.
Can you answer that question? But can you also, in the event there isn't, can you make a commentary on why you don't think it's necessary if you don't? So is there going to be somebody and then, yeah?
Well, the evacuation plan is, and the whole premise is that there's an on-site manager who will be guiding guests and advising them and helping them navigate what they need to do in the event of an emergency.
As I mentioned, phones are registered. That's part of the expectation. So there's always contact throughout. Any guest being on site, they're always under some sort of guidance from the host.
So when we talk about an on-site manager, picking up on Councillor Ryan's question, is the expectation that person will be on-site all the time, or are they a manager for the site where they will be able to contact? Can you clarify that for Councillor Ryan?
So the land holding sits within a wider land holding that has other accommodation on it, so the requirement, the on-site manager can be met through that one land holding.
Thank you. Councillor Ryan, did you hear that, and did that answer your question?
Sorry, no, it wasn't very clear. He's not loud enough. So is there a manager on site full-time or not?
So what I heard, and I'm going to ask you to speak up because we need to get sound to the microphones. Councillor Ryan, what I heard is this land holding is part of a broader land holding, and there will be somebody on that broader land holding that will be the on-site manager.
And what would the distance be of that manager away from the site?
It's directly, like the land holdings are directly next door, so it's going to be a similar distance to chalets and things, I'd say, within a kilometre from a walking, like as the price.
Is this because it's supposed to be a family operated business and the family still lives there, basically?
Would you like me to answer that? Sorry, guys. I'm Hayley Swift. I represent the client. So at the moment, there is a farmstead property that's on the adjacent land holding that is run by basically a farm manager that manages that. So there's potential for that to be extended to the operational team. To be honest, the condition, we always knew that there would have to be a 24/7 contact and ability to respond to guest needs and operational needs. And that has been identified in one of the conditions put forward by the city at 3 p.m. yesterday, that we are more than willing to accept and work through the details of where that operational management lands. But I guess to Dion's point, there are certainly other dwellings on the surrounding land holdings that facilitate that.
So the manager will be somebody that lives in very close proximity to the...
I would say it's actually 500 metres.
Yeah,
500 metres.
Doing the lecture.
Yeah, I have to. I don't have to.
Councillor Ryan, did you have any further questions?
No, thank you.
Councillor Cox, do you have any questions of the city staff?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Presiding Member. My first question is to the City of Busselton staff. I'm not sure who's best placed to answer this. The proponent's legal opinion states that it is disingenuous to suggest how an annual variation to a bushfire reduction notice as specified in a bushfire management plan would increase liability or risk or impact the discretion of the City of Busselton. It is also disingenuous to suggest that the alternative proposal would create an administrative burden to the city. Given that we've just revised our bushfire notice, which took 2 years and 6 workshops of 6 hours each, 3 hours each, and it is actually a best practice notice. The question is to the city staff. How would you respond in terms of liability, risk and administrative burden if this were to be enforced?
Can the staff respond?
I can speak probably to the variation element. So the practice that's taken at the city, if a property owner wishes to request a variation to the annual notice, is a member of the Rangers team goes out annually, assesses the site, determines whether or not the proposed mitigation actions are sufficient to reduce the bushfire risk of that property. So generally when we look at a variation request, it's in regards to issues with the topography, the terrain, waterways. It's not generally something that the city would consider when it is just about location of vegetation up close to a building and the building being built to a different standard. Variations are reviewed and assessed by ranger staff. They're not qualified building surveyors, they're not planners, they're not bushfire practitioners. So the approach that we take with variation to the notice is where they can't practically comply with the requirements of the notice due to site-specific constraints. we haven't in the past had a situation where we've had a request for a variation to notice for other reasons. We have, there was one property at Eagle Bay last year where they did look at it from a point of view that they had copper sprinklers, but they couldn't prove to us that they could remotely get those to work in the instance of a fire, because there are telecommunication issues in the area and there is a fire.
So can I just check, picking up on Councillor Cox's question, it was about administratively, what will it mean to get that notice dealt with every year?
So annually, it would require a member of the city to go out and look at the site and make an assessment and then issue a variation to the notice. Generally, from the city administration building to a site like that, you're probably looking at almost half a day's work for ranger staff. And that's if it's one ranger. If it's a complex site, sometimes it would be multiple. And there's also no guarantee that that would be approved. The notice is an annual notice, so it may subject to be changed each year.
Thank you. Councillor Cox, did that answer your question?
I just wouldn't mind a little bit more commentary around whether the proponent is suggesting that it would not increase liability or risk or impact the discretion of the city. In the opinion of the city staff, would it or would it not increase liability or risk to the city of Busselton if we were to pursue the suggested changes to the bushfire management plan to accommodate a variation in the bushfire notice?
Can the city staff comment on that?
Councillor Cox, I guess liability arises when there's an issue. So in the event that a variation is sought and for whatever reason that variation is granted, and then there's an incident and the question of liability arises, the city at the moment has advice from DFES that this proposal as it stands isn't safe. We've had advice from a third party to say the same thing. So if we then we then agree to vary a notice and something happens, then there would be liability on the city. So I'm not sure how we wouldn't be liable, because it's an independent decision to vary the notice. It's not part of this planning approval. It is an independent decision on an annual basis.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Cox?
Thank you. That does provide some clarity. And a further question, if I may.
Sure.
The legal opinion then goes on to state that it's not suggested that every approved bushfire management plan give rise to a variation of the bushfire reduction notice. The variation to the bushfire reduction notice would only be available in limited circumstances. How would the staff see that working? Because in some circumstances, people were able to get a variation of their bushfire notice as per their bushfire management plan, but in some not. So would that then lead potentially to legal, it being challenged legally if people were not to receive the same treatment?
So the response on resourcing that the city provided to the initial legal suggestion was around the suggestion that the bushfire notice could be varied so that bushfire management plans essentially override the requirement of the notice. If that was to occur, then all of a sudden every premises within the city that has a bushfire management plan, and we are talking thousands, suddenly becomes what they're required to do on an annual basis, which then means the ranger staff have to go through each record of bushfire management plan, assess the property against the bushfire management plan to ensure compliance. So that isn't practical. I can't see another mechanism of variation on a permanent basis of the bushfire notice, because we can't list specific properties on the bushfire notice. So then we come back to it has to be an annual variation, and the city cannot guarantee that that variation will be granted every year.
Thank you. Councillor Cox, any additional questions from you?
Yes, please. And just some clarification from the staff on the differences, because Wallcliffe House has been used as an example of a situation where this has occurred. and been approved by Augusta Margaret River. What differences do you perceive between what's happened with Wallcliffe House and this particular proposal?
I guess firstly, there's a question on whether that particular condition, I'm only aware it's ever been imposed once and it hasn't been challenged or subject to any legal review of whether it's a valid condition. Because a planning condition that then relies on an applicant to get an approval under separate legislation on an annual basis, I don't believe is a valid planning condition. In terms of the differences, I mean, they're completely different sites in a completely different context. There's heritage issues around Wallcliffe House. I'm not sure if the hazard ratings were the same as this particular property or if the vegetation clearing risks are the same if the property was varied. So it's a different situation in my mind, and I'm not sure that that condition has been tested sufficiently.
Anything further, Councillor Cox?
I'm just going to change tack now. I just have one question with regard, this is probably to Stephanie from the DPLH, and it concerns the visual amenity of the siting of the pavilion. In her opinion, I know that the plans have been recently amended for the pavilion to make it less visually prominent, but what is her opinion of the current amended plan for the pavilion in terms of visual amenity?
I didn't actually think that the amendments made a great deal of difference. I think it broke up the single one-dimensional wing into a sort of an angled arrangement, but I don't think that made that much difference actually to the original proposal. Was that the question?
Yes, that was. Thank you. Is there anything that you would be able to suggest that would improve the visual amenity of that building, or this may be to the proponents? Has there been any other consideration of what can be done to the pavilion to make it less visually prominent?
I had discussed with Peter Hillman the possibility of moving the site of it further downslope towards the beach, but there wasn't a desire to look into that. That wasn't looked into any further, and I don't know what the impact of that would have been without seeing any modelling of relocating it in any way. I would tend to think that it would probably be more visible from the beach, but less visible from some of the elevated viewpoints like the lighthouse and the lookout above Shelley Cove and so on. But we really wouldn't know that without seeing any modelling of that relocation.
Thank you. And just one last question, if I may. This relates to the clearing. We did hear earlier from one of the proponents that the amount of clearing that was to occur, and this is actually to the proponents, not necessarily to Stephanie, that it was the equivalent of potentially 2 residential houses. The DBCA have commented that, in their opinion, the development will require clearing of vegetation for track widening, waste truck turnaround area, bin storage and facilities, sheds, chalets, chalet access ways and car parking. Does all of that clearing, do they still stand by the fact that all of that clearing is the equivalent of 2 residential houses?
Yes, is probably the simple answer. The tracks are quite wide on the site already, so there's not actually a lot of widening. It's just the canopy goes over the top from an aerial perspective. And yeah, it's mainly small areas where the chalets and the defendable zone around the chalets is where they'll be clearing.
And given that the primary road is proposed to be 6 metres wide and is located within an area containing large marri and peppermint trees, do you foresee that it will result in the clearing of some of those large marri and peppermint trees to achieve that 6 metre width?
They're quite well set back, the trunks from where the track is. So under the canopy, there's actually quite a lot of separation. It doesn't look like a proper canopy, but when you're on the ground, there's actually a lot of separation. So we don't envisage any of the bigger trees needing to be cleared for the tracks at all. Like there was a lot of work early on through some detailed survey done of the site with a point cloud and actually locating the tracks and the chalets in amongst those different points. So it's like a big LiDAR scan of the site, which has a lot of detail, and everything's been sort of located around that.
So you don't believe that any of the soil compaction will affect the tree roots of any of these trees, in your opinion?
No.
Okay, thank you. That concludes my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Just as a follow-up to that, and this is a question for the city. On page 4 of your report, it states the site was historically cleared and that native vegetation remains to the southwestern portion, proposed to be retained. But then it says, yet one of your reasons for refusal is because of the significant visual effects of clearing. We heard from the proponent earlier that the chalets are going to be nestled and there will be a little bit of clearing. But then we hear from the VIA that the chalets aren't actually the issue from a visual impact. So to have a reason for refusal that says significant visual effects of clearing, which component of the development or warrant the clearing to create the significant visual effects of clearing that you refer to?
So in terms of the clearing of vegetation, what is unknown to us at the moment is DFES raised within their response that there is a requirement for a 10-metre separation of all vegetation between the chalet buildings and the vegetation. So that's a cleared area around the chalets. You'll notice with that, which is required under the Australian standards. There's also a requirement for, under the first bushfire notice as well as the guidelines, for turnaround points for fire engines for the chalets. So essentially what's required is a conventional 2-wheel drive as well as a type 3.4 fire appliance should be located within 30 metres of habitable buildings. So it's unclear how much vegetation will be required in terms of the clearing for that.
So can I just ask you then, before you go on, are you basing that reason for refusal on the extent of clearing you think should happen to comply with the bushfire guidelines, or on the proposal that's been submitted to you?
So we're, I guess in response, we're of the opinion that the proposal doesn't address the guidelines and Australian standards AS 3959. And what we've advised is that as a result of the clearing that would be required to comply with the guidelines and the Australian standards would result in a significant greater clearing than what's being proposed. But it's for us, we're unclear of how much is required.
Okay.
And the vegetation types, because we've got no understanding of how many trees are required to be removed or where they're located. So we don't actually have the vegetations mapped. We don't actually fully understand what vegetation would need to go.
So can I again just ask, your reason for refusal is not based on inadequate information. It's based on significant visual effects of clearing. So can I just check how you were able to frame a reason for refusal based on something that you're not sure of? Can I just ask you about that, please?
So we're of the opinion that the proposal wouldn't meet SPP 3.7 in terms of the amount of clearing that's required, which is also, I guess, on the basis of the limited information submitted, we're not clear on how much clearing and the impact on the natural environment as a result.
Okay. All right. I might move off that just for the minute. I note that you advertised the proposal quite widely. You received 3 objections and 4 submissions of support. Was the visual impact assessment included in the package of information you released to the community? And if so, did all three objections raised issue potential visual impact?
The visual impact assessment was made available in the suite of documentations, and there was only one submission that raised concerns with the visual impact statement.
Thank you. And then one of your reasons for refusal states that the proximity and level of visibility of the development from certain vantage points will undermine significant natural characteristics of the area and will be highly visible from the viewpoint. So I'm relatively familiar with the area, having visited, walked, stayed there a number of times. Given that and reviewing the VIA provided, it could be argued that the eye will be drawn first to the Bunker Bay Resort, a few large houses that already exist before it actually settles on the buildings associated with the development. That's arguably at odds with the statement made in your reasons for refusal. Could I ask you to comment on that, please? And I'm happy for Stephanie to take that question if you would like.
Yes, I was just going to say, so in Peter Hillman's work, they did do some modelling that included removal of vegetation. For example, I think there was a view from the top of the lighthouse. They showed a view with the existing vegetation, and then they modelled another view with the removal of vegetation.
That's not correct.
Is that not correct?
Yes, I'm hearing that's not correct. And I did ask that question earlier, Stephanie. I specifically asked the applicant whether they'd done that, and they said no. Okay, can I just, let's move on for the minute. Let's talk about the communal building. So the applicant contends that the scale and finish of the communal building is comparable to a rural shed or a farmhouse, and is it largely this building that's creating concern from a visual impact perspective, or are you concerned about all the buildings?
Was that a question for me? Sorry.
Probably the city, and if they want to refer to you, I'm happy for them to do that.
So in terms of the city's concerns, so SPP 6.1 addresses visual impact from the public vantage points. From the lighthouse, the actual hill where the communal building is to be sited is clearly visible from the lighthouse. It's also, so in our opinion, as well as as Stephanie's noted, the building will be visible from ground up. Whilst Bunker Bay Resort is viewed from the lighthouse, essentially all you're seeing is a section of the roof above the trees. The resort roof is actually dark green. It blends very well in with the trees and the vegetation, and nestles within that vegetation. Whereas on the other hand, this building will be highly visible from that hill, from both the lighthouse and Shelley Cove, as well as some of the vantage points along Cape Naturalist Road. Now, if Stephanie, if you'd like to add anything further.
No, I wasn't sure that the Bunker Bay Resort was visible from the top of the lighthouse, actually. Due to the terrain, it sits down below the ridge, whereas this current site doesn't. There's some, I had thought it would have been useful, actually, for viewshed mapping to be done from the view from the lighthouse back to the site that would clarify what area of the site would be visible from the lighthouse if vegetation was lost. But that mapping has not been done at this point. But
okay, I'll move on to some issues of fire, if you don't mind. This is for the city, and if DFS want to assist, they are welcome. We've talked about it a lot already, and in reviewing your assessment against SPP 3.7 in the report, it's not entirely clear to me whether the application proposes an outcomes-based solution that cannot be supported or an outcomes-based solution that DFS and the city are not comfortable supporting. Which is it?
I think the way the guidelines are written, it would fall to the practitioner to demonstrate to the city and DFS that the outcomes-based approach is sufficient to be supported. I don't believe, my understanding of our role is that it's not up to us to say if it could be possible or not. We would need to be presented with that.
Okay. And on page 15 of the report, it states that DFS don't agree that a refuge is a standalone solution to mitigating risk to life safety. But then why does the legislation make provision for this in the event there's only one road in and out?
So the legislation's been prepared with additional inputs other than just bushfire. So DFS isn't the only person informing that policy. So it would probably be best for that to be asked to DPLH.
Okay. The report also says that the city remains concerned that the proposed development won't be able to comply with the ABCB performance solution at building permit stage. If that's the case, won't that be the fatal flaw for the development at that point?
So the city referred the proposal internally to our building surveyors who have raised concerns with the construction standards. And yes, they are not convinced that it would meet the guidelines in terms of the construction standards.
And would that be a certified permit that comes in, or would that be something that the city assesses themselves?
We would expect it to be a certified permit to come in.
In the event the city chooses not to vary its bushfire risk reduction notice in any given year, I do note in some of the commentary that I've seen that all the issues that you need to take into account. But would the city also need to consider the visual impact that this could potentially have and make the decision accordingly? Would that be one of the factors that you would factor in, whether to issue one or not?
No, it wouldn't. It's an assessment under separate legislation that only deals with risk of around fire. It has no consideration of the planning framework, the background of an application, or of visual amenity.
Okay. And I'm using the term, it's my term, the wicked problem as set out on page 13 of your report is that the city won't support the chalets without an APZ, but it doesn't support the clearing of vegetation for an APZ, given the environmental and visual impacts you think might result. So does this tension between the need to manage bushfire risk and minimise visual impact render this property undevelopable, in your view?
No, not necessarily. I guess the issue with this proposal is, as we talked about with the bushfire notice and what if there's no variation, the clearing, if there was clearing, if the bushfire notice wasn't varied, we don't know what that impact is. So there hasn't been a visual assessment of the development if it complied with the bushfire notice. Could it be developed? Well, yes, it can, but it needs all these things factored into it. There are cleared spaces on the property. There are methods that buildings can be used to be less evident in the landscape, but we're assessing a proposal that's been provided to us, and we don't believe that this proposal is striking that balance.
Okay, so I guess just on that, in my mind, I'm thinking that if you were then to redesign this and most of the development sits in the cleared areas, then we're going to have a visual impact issue. That's why I'm asking the question, does that tension that exists, but something's got to give, right? So does that tension that exists between the two make anything other than a very modest, potentially single resi proposal undevelopable, or do you think that it is entirely possible to develop without anything having to give?
It's hard to answer without a proposal before us. I mean, there's methods of building earth covered buildings, material pallets, etc., etc. So you could never say that it couldn't be developed, but a proposal needs to consider all of the elements that are required to be considered and develop sensibly.
Sure. Okay. And again, these are, I'm not going to apologise for them, but I acknowledge they're tough questions. And I understand you can't apply some of this stuff retrospectively, but I'm just trying to understand, how does this proposal compare from a visual impact perspective, and not just from the lighthouse, but from all those vantage points and a fire vulnerability perspective to the adjoining Bunker Bay Resort?
Is the question, how does this particular development
Yeah, and I'm
compared
not
to the Bunker Bay Resort.
I'm not asking for a technical assessment, but in your view, do you think that this is less visually intrusive and probably better designed to withstand fire risk or not?
Not fire risk, because the fire framework wasn't in place when the Toolman Resort was developed.
Can I also add that the Bunker Bay Resort was before the SPP 6.1?
I understand that, but I'm just, never mind what, and that's why I prefaced the question with, I understand you can't retrospectively apply. I'm asking a question, do you think, just off the top of your head, that this would be better from a visual amenity impact assessment point of view and fire view point of view than the Bunker Bay Resort? Don't worry, it's
I don't know we can answer it, because again, if this is less visually evident, but not safe, it's a totally different framework. I'm not sure we can answer it.
No, that's fine, thank you. Last question from me at the minute. So aside from bushfire risk and visual impacts that tend to be a large focus of your RA, it appears your RA outlines that the proposal represents a low-scale, low-intensity development with a light footprint and a high design quality, and I'm paraphrasing there, and that it meets the requirements of the underlying planning framework. Would you agree with that summation?
Yes, we would.
Other members in the room? Member Hyde.
Thank you. I'm looking at your BRRN and some of the considerations in requesting variation include environmental constraints. And further on, it talks about habitat for fauna. Now, we know that this area doesn't have techs and PECs and so forth, but there is an acknowledgement that some of the fauna use the vegetation, which is of good standing, as habitat. So can I ask, please, in considering this hypothetical request for variation to the BRRN, why that would not be taken into account in this location, given that they have those issues have been specifically raised in the assessment?
It's a consideration, but what we're also talking about is the difference between 3 metres around a building and 20 metres around a building. So that then has to be weighed up against the fire risk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of the bushfire notice, that equally applies to a house where there might be a single tree that encroaches into the 20-metre zone, and in that risk, is it appropriate to just leave that tree there rather than just a full 20 metres? This is a very different situation where we're proposing to leave all of the vegetation within the 20-metre area around each building. So to then weigh up the fire risk against an environmental factor of completely clearing it. And I guess that's why there can't be any guarantee as to what that determination is going to be on an annual basis. Is it that they would say, no, we're not going to vary it at all? Will they vary it a little bit and allow clearing to 18 metres? It's uncertain. And then if it is allowed, what is the visual impact? Because it hasn't been modelled.
Equally, they might decide just to close the business and not bother with the variation, I imagine. So there are a number of variables, not that they must necessarily clear the 20 metres. Could I also ask, please, we have the SPP to do with bushfire management, but we have a series of guidelines which are there to interpret how they could be applied. And they're very recent, the guidelines, late last year. And so they do talk about the 3 metre clearance area is acceptable in an outcomes-based solution. And we have heard from the applicant that isn't associated with firefighting per se, but more to do with transfer of embers and the like. So could you please explain why you are imposing almost a blanket 20 metre spread without considering that some properties within your local government area may be needing to follow an outcomes-based approach.
It's not a blanket 20 metre spread. So if you actually read the notice definitions, the managed fuel area requires the vegetation within that zone of the property to be managed. So the offset of vegetation from the buildings is that the width, the trunks of a building have to be 2 metres from the walls of the dwelling and 5 metres vertical clearance. But then within that managed fuel area, it's managing that low fuel zone, similar to what's being proposed for the 25 metre zone around the communal building.
And I gather that there is reticulation in this area and that it is proposed that the development is managed. So I'm still trying to work out exactly, you know, what your issues are between the BRRN and
the BRRN is probably just needs to be considered completely separately to the development itself. If I look at the BRN and I look at what's in front of us and hypothetically assess it as though it has been built, it wouldn't comply with the requirements under the category 3 of our bushfire notice to have a fire break around the outside. So there should be a fire break on the boundary between the road and the property. The grasses on the property need to be maintained to less than 10 centimetres in height. There also needs to be a turnaround area installed near every habitable dwelling. So in the definition of the bushfire notice, we use a different terminology than is in planning and building framework intentionally. And habitable dwellings within our bushfire notice also encompass places where people work. It could be a caravan, it could be a shed. We've kept it quite broad because we can't guarantee at any point in time that somebody won't be in those buildings for longer periods of time. So we do look at it slightly different than you would from a planning and building perspective.
Okay, thank you. The applicant raised an issue that ordinarily when there's a peer review, there is dialogue between the peer reviewer and the preparer of the BMP. I think the peer review was instructed by the city. Were you aware that there wasn't that dialogue in accordance with normal procedures?
No, we weren't aware that there wasn't that dialogue. The peer review was sent to them though in April, so they have had it for a significant amount of time.
And I understand that then there were some revisions made, but I think your RAR states that that the revised BMP wasn't sent back to the peer reviewer. Why would that be the case?
There was no changes in terms of what the peer reviewer had raised.
Okay. Could I go now to the visual impact analysis, please? The city's RAR talks predominantly, it does state that the VIA that the applicant prepared was sent to the DPLH. It was also sent to DBCA. The actual RAR talks solely with reference to the DPLH review. It doesn't talk to the DBCA review. However, we can see from one of the attachments that the DBCA's review stated that the VIA is sound, the assessment outcomes are supported, and that in their opinion, the impact of the proposal on DBCA managed land, which I gather is the Lewin Naturalist National Park and the properties around this, will be negligible to low. So my question is, how did you apply weight in your responsible authority report more to the DPLH review of the VIA versus the DBCA review of the VIA?
DBCA were looking at the visual impact in terms of, yes, you're correct, in terms of the actual national park. You will also notice that they raised that the VIA hadn't been assessed from the actual marine park itself. But we did raise the Lewin Naturalist policy also talks about visual vantage points, which is obviously Shelley Cove and the lighthouse, and then in other areas of the Cape, it's the Cape to Cape track. So we also referred to DPLH, who is also the experts in visual impact assessors, for that advice on in terms of the visual vantage points.
All right, thank you. The applicant, in response to your in response to the alternate provided through the Regulation 13 request, has raised concerns around the contribution that the alternate is asking for, in that they say this is a short stay development and therefore contributions should not apply. What would your response be to that, please?
DCA 1 within the local planning scheme refers to contributions and where they're required. This particular site falls within the rural remainder, and the scheme actually has reference that tourist accommodation also contributes at a 50% rate. So we would be charging 50% of that contribution.
Regardless of the land use, is that your position?
The scheme is clear in terms of tourist accommodation is also required to make a contribution.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask, in terms of shelter in place and evacuation, etc., and you stating that it's not your preference or do not support, presumably there are places, including the Pullman Resort, which their evacuation plan is shelter in place, or I think go to Eagle Bay Community Hall or something like that. There must be developments where that is the occurrence in the case of an emergency. How do you deal with those places in terms of your BRRN and evacuation management?
The only recognised evacuation centre within the city would be the Naturalist Community Centre and also the Geograph Leisure Centre. The other facilities, we don't recognise them as evacuation centres.
No, but my question was how do you deal with those land uses and resorts in the context of your BRRN?
So just to be clear, there hasn't been any shelter on site approvals issued in the city to date.
Right. And in terms of
if there is an emergency, then together with the incident controller, which is likely DFS or DBCA, decisions are made on the day of how that works. Yeah. But in terms of approved evacuation centres, is as per Joe outlined, it's the two recreation centres.
Okay. And as per a couple of years ago, DFS handled quite a lot of that evacuation. And how do you deal with that issue of clearance around properties in those other resorts? I'm thinking of the Pullman Bunker Bay Resort, particularly because the vegetation is right up next to the chalets there. How is that managed under your BRRN?
So Pullman Resort actually did get an inspection last year and they were considered compliant. So they've got a lot of bitumised areas and car parks. Some of the individual chalets did not have their gutters and setbacks completely substantive. So the ranger did issue them a list of things that they needed to do. But I think the context of the Pullman Resort is quite different because there is a fair bit of bitumised areas and there is grassed areas in there mixed in amongst it. It's quite a different context than the design of this development.
I'll leave it there. Member Colton.
I think we've gone through a lot already. A lot of my questions have been answered.
All right, great. I think unless there are any further questions of the city staff, we're going to move.
I do just have one I'd like to go back to the applicant on, if I may. There was a very clear statement that the proposal doesn't meet Australian standard, I think 359, is that
395.
395?
3959.
That one.
It does.
In what way does it?
The buildings that are the chalets, for instance, will actually be constructed to the BALFZ standards, which is prescribed in AS395.
Sorry, could you just a little bit louder, because I'm not sure
sorry.
whether the other party can hear it, because I'm struggling to hear.
The buildings will be constructed to the specifications in AS3959. So the chalets, which are BALFZ, will be constructed to BALFZ standard, although we're going to exceed that because we're going to do FRL 6060, because that's a better standard, but it's also one that's easily done. The shelter itself is in BAL 19, but it will also be constructed to a higher standard. So it'll be constructed to an FRL of 60-60-60. So it's a much higher standard than what's actually specified in AS 3959.
Thank you for that answer.
Can we get some comment from DFIS on that then, please?
DFIS, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so with A3959, when a building's within flame zone and there's less than 10 metres separation from the vegetation, there isn't a deemed to satisfy construction within A3959 that they need to go down across a performance approach. So as in our submission, A3959 says you will need to build to structures that are tested against a testing method, because there isn't a deemed to satisfy construction approach when the vegetation is within 10 metres.
Thank you. Rebuttal? Struggling to get all this.
AS3959 is a deemed to satisfy solution. So even what Jackson just mentioned about that 10 metres, what it will require is that the building certifier actually identifies certified materials that are actually used in that construction. So within 10 metres, you can't use the diagrams that are in AS3959 for roof structures and things like that. It needs to be specifically designed. But it's not a preclusion from being able to achieve the DTS. It's just a standard. So you can go out and you can buy rated windows. You can go out and you can buy rated. So someone's actually had those products tested. So you use those tested materials. That's what it's referring to. So you don't just copy the construction as a builder yourself, copy the roof design that's in AS3959. You have to go out and get something that's actually specified in the process. That's not difficult to do.
All right, thank you.
Unless there are any further questions, I suggest we then move to the report. So we have a responsible authority report in front of us with a recommendation to refuse the application for I think a number of reasons, 10 different reasons. I'm going to need to seek a mover and seconder for that recommendation in the report. Is anyone prepared to move that recommendation? Battling to see who that might be.
Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Councillor Ryan. You are moving the recommendation for refusal. Do I have a seconder for that recommendation?
Yes, I'll second Councillor Cox.
Councillor Cox, thank you. Councillor Ryan, do you wish to speak?
I do. Thank you, presiding member. I'm not averse to this development. I think it is a great tourism offering, but at this juncture I can't support it, and for the following reasons. The visual amenity under SBP 6.2, LUS 5.2 states development and intensification of land use that will affect the views from Capes Road and Cape Naturalist Road will not be supported. LUS 3.8 states conforming with other policies under this LNR SPP, particularly those relating to fire management and Lastly, the Ridge Landscape Amenity Area talks of low impact tourism development. Suggested changes of the communal pavilion, which would satisfy these issues of visual amenity, should therefore be considered to meet these policy requirements together with bushfire issues. In relation to the bushfires issue, we are extremely mindful that fire has and could be significant in the city of Busselton. We had the biggest fire in 30 years, approximately 1,300 hectares in Yogenup in January 2025. The recent Dunsborough fire in February 2025, and the significant Meelup fire in December 2024. Testament to this is the fact we have the Coulson firefighting infrastructure stationed at our local airport each summer. I might also remind members that Warcliffe House burnt down in 2011 in the Shire of Margaret River, so I'm not sure that it was a good example to be citing. Approximately 50 hectares was burnt in Gracetown, Margaret River in 2019, and if anyone did not see the damage, I describe it as looking like a moonscape. No lives were lost and no homes were lost, however, it was dangerously close. It is also relevant to mention that power and telephone signal in this region is, putting it nicely, woeful. Therefore, the bushfire emergency plan assumes on page 13 that mobile phone and text messages is a given. It has been demonstrated on a number of occasions that both fail during a fire. The suggestion that the City of Busselton can change the bushfire notice in line with what AMR did is not comparing apples with apples. Our bushfire notice has taken a number of years to get to this point and was comprehensively reviewed and commended as best practice. There is a suggestion that we update our bushfire notice for this development. Why would we change it to serve one development when significant consultation was undertaken to get to the point we recently did? Further, it does not serve the wider community in protecting them, and a decision was made to not allow a BMP to override the bushfire notice. The City of Busselton and local governments in general have a legal and ethical duty of care to its residents, ratepayers, on-site and off-site staff and visitors alike, but also to our volunteer firefighters in relation to bushfire management. A duty of care is not only the Bushfire Act, but work health and safety and the principles of common law negligence. To create this level of risk gives me no comfort on behalf of the ratepayers and residents of the city that I represent. Principles of common law negligence may breach the duty of care if it was found not to have followed established procedures and legislation. Further, there are a number of issues under duty of care. If a significant issue occurred, but perhaps the major one for me is whether the local government followed established procedures and legislation. Legal opinion suggests the proposed conditions assumes and effectively requires that an exemption will be granted every year for the development to remain acceptable. The city must assess bushfire notice exemption applications on their merit, and the condition would fetter the city's statutory discretion, undermining its ability to make independent decisions based on current risk assessments and seasonal conditions. The legal opinion also suggests granting such an exemption, which increases risk to life or property, would expose the city to liability in the event of a bushfire. If the exemption is refused by the city, then the vegetation must be cleared, and I understand the impacts, both ecological and visual, of such clearing have not been assessed by the relevant agencies. If the DAP is considering such a condition, referral back to the relevant agencies is recommended. It should be noted that if an exemption is refused, then the development would be unable to be implemented in the form as proposed. Therefore, a deferral to alter the plan or change the plan is necessary to alleviate all the legal ramifications which this may present. I'll wind up. SBP 3.7 says to implement effective risk-based land use planning that prioritises the preservation of life and reduces the impact of bushfires on property and infrastructure. The precautionary principle needs to be adopted here. That is, where uncertainty exists, decision should err on the side of caution. The city cannot guarantee a variation will be granted, taking into consideration each year the level of risk to life and property based upon seasonal conditions, as crystal balls don't exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ryan. Councillor Cox has seconded. Do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll echo a fairly similar argument to Councillor Ryan. The intent of SPP 3.7 bushfire is to preserve life and reduce the impact of bushfire on property and infrastructure. This development is inconsistent with this intent, including policy objective 5.1 of SPP 3.7, because a vulnerable land use in the form of a tourist accommodation is proposed in a BAL FZ area with no APZ to retain visual amenity and preserve landscape value. Because the policy measures of SPP 3.7 have not been satisfactorily addressed, in my opinion, by the applicants, and the subject site is located in a bushfire-prone area, a precautionary approach should be applied. Therefore, this development in its proposed location constitutes, to me, an unacceptable bushfire risk. I do not accept the assertion from the applicant that the non-compliance issues of the development could be addressed if the city was compelled to amend the wording of the bushfire risk reduction notice to exclude from the requirement to create managed fuel areas any development which has a BMP approved by way of a development approval which proposes a differential treatment to habitable buildings. The city has clearly reiterated its position that it is not possible to apply a condition that requires the proponent or owner to apply annually for an exemption to the city's bushfire risk reduction notice. The BRRN is issued under the Bushfire Act 1954. It is the city's view that approving an annual exemption cannot be achieved as the BMP relies on the city granting approval to vary the BRRN each year. The city cannot guarantee a variation will be granted, taking into consideration each year the level of risk to life and property based on seasonal conditions. Finally, for me, comments from DFES also echo my opinion. DFES states the proposal is considered to create a small, vulnerable and isolated development surrounded by an extreme bushfire hazard, increasing the threat of bushfire and vulnerability of people, property and infrastructure to bushfire at this location, which is contrary within the policy objectives. Therefore, I support the refusal stated in the RAR. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Does any other member wish to speak for or against the recommendation?
I would like to speak against the recommendation, please. I actually didn't find the Responsible Authority report provided a great deal of clarity for me around the assessment of this. I did find there was some conflicting and some contradictory statements throughout. The level of community submission I took into account. It was, quite limited, given that 176 letters and public advertising took place. And I wonder whether that is representative of the significance of this site within the community. The things that I've drawn from the RAR, which tend to balance out some of those negatives, is that the Southwest, which is a regional design review panel, were generally supportive and potentially saying that this was potentially an outstanding example of development, and certainly the plans, as we would hope, had responded to their comments. The city's health, infrastructure, environment and building services comments were that any issues could be addressed by conditions. Council on the 12th of December last year actually initiated the scheme amendment to support chalets in the rural zone as a discretionary use, and obviously at this point we are considering the level of discretion, and tourist and visitor accommodation also was included as an A use. So that's a seriously entertained document which suggests that in this location these sorts of developments could occur. It's very much in line with the density considerations, which would allow approximately 8 units. There are 10. But again, the RAR in its assessment states that the rural amenity is maintained. The setbacks are appropriate to local planning policy 2.4, and particularly in the context of the vegetated areas, states that the siting of the chalets ensures impacts on existing scenic and rural character are generally mitigated. The site, the rest of the site, other than vegetated areas, is very degraded, and certainly the SAT review of a previous subdivision application suggests that this area is not viable for agriculture, although I have to say in that context I didn't find that the inclusion of the SAT review of 98 dwellings in a subdivision was really relevant to this application. DWER expressed no concerns in relation to the ephemeral streams. And again, therefore, I'm not sure why one of the reasons for refusal is about removing the playground in proximity to those. And we've talked a lot about SPP 3.7. The purpose of the guidelines is to allow for an outcomes-based approach, to allow for a 3-metre defendable space, to allow for alternate construction methods. The area has lots of pedestrian paths and signage. We've heard that there would be an emergency evacuation plan and on-site staff to assist in all of that. The plans would need to be certified by an independent qualified engineer. WALGA gives some guidance about conditions that might require compliance with the BMP under the Planning and Development Act. I stated earlier that the DBCA, in their review of the VIA, found it to be sound and to have negligible and low impact. And some have spoken today about the visibility of the communal building or the pavilion. There can be aspects of visibility which are benign, which may even be compatible, although buildings can be seen. Just because we see a building doesn't automatically make it intrusive or incongruous with its setting. And I think that's important to consider. The architect has stated that they have used elements from the vernacular. They have tried to use natural materials. They have used roof pitches, all of which is to blend the development in. And I find their VIA to be very thorough. And I don't find the built form to be intrusive at all. In fact, I think that you could have agricultural buildings which would be in keeping with the rural zone, which would be much more incongruous with the setting and the slope when viewed from all of those vantage points that we've talked about. So rather than go on, I'll leave it there, Presiding Member, but I'm not in support of the refusal.
Thank you. Member Coltaz.
Yes, I too speak against the recommendation. I think the planning framework for the locality does demonstrate that this use can be considered. The contradiction seems to be brought out by visual amenity issues and bushfire. The fact that there hasn't been a groundswell of objection from a visual amenity point of view leads me to believe that that's not a factor that the community sees as being a problem. The fact that you can see buildings, I think that any development you'll be able to see buildings, and I think that the proposal with nestling chalets within a vegetated area is appropriate. I'll get onto the bushfire issues shortly. The visual amenity assessment that was undertaken, I think, was somewhat contradictory to my view. It didn't address some of the issues that the proponents had raised, and I think that to rely on visual amenity assessment is probably a little bit difficult to justify for a development that the design review panel said is a exemplary, a good example of what should be happening in a site like this. The site isn't visible, or the development is not visible from Cape Naturalist Road, and there was a lot of reliance on that in the visual assessment review. The rural amenity of the area isn't compromised by the proposal. I think that it's well recognised that this is a tourism node, and there will be something of a tourism nature that's going to be developed on this site, and a low-key development such as this one is contemplated and should be supported. In terms of bushfire, I think that to refuse it without testing the outcomes-based approach is something that I think and I acknowledge the caution that has to be relied upon in assessing this development, but to knock it back before they can even demonstrate an outcomes-based approach, I think is unfair on the proponents. And I think that they've gone a long way to show that this development can be supported, and give them the opportunity to show an outcomes-based approach, I think is warranted. So all in all, I'm supporting the proposal and not supporting the refusal at this stage.
Thank you, Member Paz. From my perspective, from a vision and design point of view, it's a great proposal. I think it's thoughtful, respectful, low intensity, light on the ground, high quality design in a great way. Clearly strongly supported by the tourism agencies, and it appears there's general community support for it as well. From an environmental perspective, there are priority species on the site, but these aren't impacted by the current proposal. There will be some clearing required, but we've heard that it is not much, and their environmental report submitted with the application confirms that much of the vegetation within the remainder of the site is degraded. From the assessment outlined in the city's responsible authority report, the proposal appears to meet the requirements of the underlying planning framework, and I think Member Hyde went into that in some detail. So the city's 10 reasons for refusal essentially boil down to two key issues, and they're not minor issues, but there are two of them: visual impact and bushfire risk. And the tension with this proposal is that to minimise visual impact, bushfire risk increases, and to mitigate bushfire risk, actions need to be taken which increase visual impact. A little bit familiar, quite familiar with the area, having visited, walked, stayed in this area numerous times. Given that, and in reviewing the visual impact assessment provided, it's my view that any visual impact of the current proposal is much less of an issue than bushfire concerns. I think the development's been designed so that it's really only the communal building that's easily visible at first glance, and I think the way the building has been designed, it is way less obtrusive than structures that already exist and that are already visible from different viewing points. I think it's been very thoughtfully designed to reduce or negate visual impact. It's not really an issue for me for the communal building, and I'm not sure it would be a significant issue even if more vegetation was needed to be cleared to mitigate bushfire risk around the chalet. So visual impact is not my issue. I'd be prepared actually to approve the proposal at this meeting if it wasn't for the issue of bushfire, and specifically the differing perspectives on the level of compliance with SPP 3.7 and the bushfire planning guidelines, and the differing perspectives on the actual level of risk and the appropriateness on the mitigation measures proposed. I'm not a bushfire expert. So when a proposal doesn't meet the acceptable solutions of the guidelines, I need to rely somewhat on the advice of the bushfire experts as to whether an outcomes-based solution is appropriate or safe before I'm comfortable agreeing with that solution. In this case, the numerous experts involved don't agree. And given the nature of the areas of disagreement and given the potential consequences of getting this wrong, it's essentially on that basis that I'm not comfortable to approve the application at this meeting. And it would be very easy to just refuse it in line with the recommendations of the Responsible Authority report, but I'm not comfortable doing that at this stage either. As I mentioned at the outset, I think this is a great design. It's been very thoughtfully done. It's strongly supported by the tourism agencies and would be a great development for the area. So if some design and I'm not sure if they could, but if minor design changes could be made to alleviate some of the concerns, and if the differences in expert opinion could be reduced or reconciled, I would be very happy. It would be a great pity if this development didn't go ahead and it was ultimately replaced with a proposal that ticks bushfire and visual amenity boxes but doesn't come close to the vision and quality of the design currently proposed. So given this and given the information received very late in the piece, and I will make a comment that I was very disappointed that we received the alternate recommendation for approval at such a late stage and way beyond the date that the DAP Secretariat requested it. It makes it very difficult for this panel to review that information when it is received that late. We've also received differing legal opinions, and the conditions of approval that we were provided with yesterday are very complex. So my preference would be to vote for a deferral of the application, primarily to allow the applicant to properly consider and respond to the issues that have been raised, the design changes that have been suggested by the City of Busselton in the alternate motion and draft conditions that were eventually provided. Not to say that you have to adhere to that, but my view was just to give you time and space, more than a day, to actually contemplate those. And a deferral would also allow potentially for preparation of an amended visual impact assessment that actually models the likely visual impact of adherence to the city's BRRN requirements. Doesn't mean that that wouldn't be supported. So I'd be keen to see what that looked like. And allow us all to properly digest the legal implications of the intertwining of bushfire management plans and BRRNs. So I won't be voting for the refusal because I don't think this warrants a refusal. It's a great proposal. I just can't bring myself to an approval at this particular point. I will make it clear or known that I did prepare some wording for a deferral motion last night in the event that it was needed today. I believe the wording was circulated to the members this morning. In the event the motion to refuse the application is lost, I will look at moving the deferral motion, and if that is seconded, we can talk more about it at that point. But that is my position on the report. Councillor Ryan, as mover of the primary motion, would you like to close?
I'm happy to close, and I would be happy to second your motion for deferral. I think everything that has been said is relevant. I think it is a fantastic development, and it just seems a little bit sad that we would refuse it without the opportunity for the developers to work with the staff on a better outcome. So I'd be happy to vote against the staff's refusal and to support your deferral.
Okay, so I just need to, from a procedural point of view, I need to make it clear that we have to vote on the refusal now.
Absolutely, yes.
If that motion is lost, then it is open to any member to put forward an alternate, and we have two alternates. We have a deferral and we have an approval, so I will then call members to bring forward alternates if the motion to refuse is lost. With that, I will put the motion to refuse the application to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendation? Against? The recommendation to refuse, the motion to refuse is lost.
Did everybody put their hand up? Oh, the councillors, did they? Okay.
Therefore, I will now ask any other DAP members if they have alternate motions that they would like to bring forward. Last chance.
Madam Presiding Member, are you moving your deferral?
I'm giving other members space to see if they wish to bring forward an alternate motion before I table mine.
So I, as I said before, I'd be happy to support your deferral motion if you table it.
All right. All right. In the absence of any other alternate motion, I will bring forward that motion. I'm going to pop it on the screen very briefly. So I do put, I am moving an alternate motion to defer. Formally, I will seek a seconder for that. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you. Can you just, which councillor are we talking to there?
Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Councillor Ryan. All right, I will speak very briefly to this. There have been reasons of deferral put forward that essentially allow the applicant, in summary, to go away and in less than one afternoon to go away and consider the conditions that the city has provided us. Some of those conditions appear to require a wholesale or substantial redesign of the proposal, and they deal essentially with bushfire. The purpose of the deferral motion is not to say to the applicant, you have to meet those requirements or you have to respond to those issues. It is giving you the space and the opportunity to do so. If you choose not to, then that will be assessed on its merits as it comes forward. So the first part of the deferral motion allows you to respond to the alternate resolution in the manner that you see fit. Second point allows you to properly consider and respond to the design changes that the city requested, not to say again that you have to make them, but it gives you space to respond to them. Can we scroll down? It allows you space to, allows the applicant space to prepare an amended visual impact assessment to support any relocations of buildings that they may wish to make, or to demonstrate the likely visual impact of adherence to the requirements of the bushfire risk reduction notice. I'd be particularly keen to see what that looks like. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't support it, but I'd like to see what that looks like. And I would like to understand the ecological impact of adhering to the bushfire risk reduction notice. And I would like to allow you space to actually properly engage the City of Busselton with the applicants on some draft conditions, and I'm not foreshadowing that those will form part of an approval. They may form part of a primary motion, or they might form part of an alternate wording, and I will request at this point that when the responsible authority report comes forward, if this motion gets across the line, that the City of Busselton proactively includes those recommended conditions of approval, even if you are still recommending refusal of the report, to give us the space to properly assess and consider them. And then lastly, and I'm not saying we will need to do this, but depending, because I think we're all pretty familiar with the site, but depending on what comes forward, it may be warranted that we need to go out and have a site visit. So this just creates space. The alternate talks to a period of up to 180 days. That's not to say that it needs to take 180 days. It's just that it gives you the opportunity and space to do what the alternate suggests. And I'm happy through debate if any member wishes to change any of this wording. Councillor, would you, as the seconder, like to speak to the alternate?
Just briefly to say that I thank you for the alternative motion, and happy to defer. And as you said, 180 days may not be the amount of time, but I think the bushfire issue is very real, especially for the City of Busselton and the amount of fires we have here. And we don't have a dedicated fire service. They're all volunteers, but thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak for or against the alternate?
No.
I want to speak against it, please. I don't think it's reasonable to require the applicant to go through this process on the basis of what I've heard today, which satisfies me that the standard of construction and the considerations of bushfire have been taken account of to a higher standard than is required by the basics of SPP 3.7. I think the purpose of the guidelines associated with SPP 3.7 is entirely to provide for alternate outcomes-based solutions, which I think the applicant has done to the best of their ability and probably better than the guidelines considered could be practically possible. And I think it's a shame that the construction methodologies and the way in which the BMP has been put together has not been responded to in a more positive and constructive manner by referral authorities. It would have been good to have seen some consideration of those things rather than just, well, we don't know and we're not sure. I think, you know, some aspects like 2E, relocate structure 7 Waterfalls nature play area, I'm not sure why that's even there. Dwyer had no issue with it at all. And I don't think it's necessary to do further visual impact assessment necessarily as a separate point 3 when, if the applicant decides not to go for anything in point 2, are we still asking them to still do an alternate visual impact assessment for a BRRN? I think if we're going to find ourselves completely on the other page where there's no vegetation and then we've got development out in the open, and then we'll hear that everybody's unhappy with the visual impact assessment. And I think what we've got in front of us is a very balanced proposal which takes account of bushfire, which takes account of visual impact assessment and meets a very careful middle line, considering risk factors and safety factors and amenity factors all together. And this development has already been in the system for well over 200 days, and to ask for them for even up to 180 days, I would have hoped that within a 200-day period, some of these matters which are before us now could have been adequately resolved, and we would not be looking at such a long list of things which you know, has been put forward by the local government. I find some of these things that have been put forward actually to say, it's just another way of saying we refuse the development, quite honestly. So I'm not supportive of deferral, but I think I am a lone voice.
Does any other member wish to speak for or against the alternate motion before I close?
I would like to just speak to it and reduce the deferral period to 90 days.
Right. I think the way we would have to do that is the motion. I'm not prepared to, as the mover, to move to 90 days because we don't have the mechanism under our regs. If you're not quite ready in 90 days, it has to come back. We don't have the ability to grant extensions, and the 180 days provides you can bring it back in 90 days. Take all 180.
Okay, well, I'll withdraw that.
Okay. I will then seek to close, and I would just like to, in closing, say that actually I agree with most of what Member Hyde has said in her counter-argument about bushfire. I think, and it is frustrating that it's taken 220 days to get to this point, but it hasn't been resolved. And so for me, I agree that I I'm concerned that there's differing opinions on bushfire. And it makes sense to me what the proponent has said in terms of what they have brought forward. The lingering issue for me is the bushfire risk reduction notice and its intertwining with the bushfire management plan. And then other stuff sort of falls off that. And the visual impact assessment, unless the applicant chooses to redesign, in which case there'd need to be a visual impact assessment, and so we're leaving it open to you in that sense. The purpose of including the visual impact assessment in the deferral is really to say, we may not mind what that looks like if you have to clear more. So just go and model it, and it gives you an opportunity to say, yes, we have modelled it, and that's what it looks like, and then we can make next time around a properly informed decision on that, and it'll also give us space to look at that legal tension between the BRRN and the bushfire management plan. So that's essentially, but apart from that, I actually agree with what Member Hyde has said. I just can't bring myself to an approval just at the minute. With that, I'm going to close, and I'm going to put the alternate motion for a deferral to the vote. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. Thank you very much. Item 4 is Form 2 DAP applications. There are none for this meeting. Item 5, Section 31 SAT reconsiderations, also none. D of our agenda, other business. Item 1, SAT applications and Supreme Court appeals. All SAT applications for DAPs are listed on the website. And with that, I close the meeting at 4:51 p.m. And I thank everyone for attendance. I thank our local government DAP members. I thank the local government officers and the officers from the agencies that have attended this long meeting to participate. I thank the presenters for the very valuable information that you have provided us today. And I thank my colleagues for, as usual, doing a magnificent job.
Thank you, Presiding Member.